Chapter 1610. After the Wu family's sword mound and Dongyue's sword pool's swordmasters knocked their fingers and stomped their feet respectively, everyone noticed that thousands of cracks as thick as wrists and as thin as earthworms had appeared on the bluestone street outside the center of the purple robe. They crazily spread to both sides of the street like a flood breaking through a dam, rushing toward the hundreds of onlookers in the buildings on both sides of the street. Many people were so scared that their guts were about to explode. They only wanted to see the king of Bailiang's glory, but they never thought that they would lose their lives. Fortunately, the snake-like cracks slowed down slightly before they hit Wu Jian's sword energy wall. Although the cracks quickly climbed up the wall, their momentum finally weakened at a speed visible to the naked eye when they reached a height that was about the same as the doors of restaurants and inns. All of this happened silently. When the dense cracks rapidly spread toward Chai Qingshan's side, the stairs under the Dongyue sword pool's sect master's feet exploded at the same time, sending dust and dirt flying. Li Bai said regretfully, Xianyuan Qingfeng lost to the king of Bailiang in the first two matches, and our sect master also lost to the Wu family's sword mound's master. Song Tinglu said indignantly, Master and the Wu family's ancestor both used their swordplay techniques to block Xianyuan Qingfeng's energy. Master met force with force, and that's why there was such a commotion. The Wu family's ancestor was much more cunning. Not only did he use fancy moves, but he also seemed to have won against Master. In fact, Master only needed to use one of the 7 swords of our sect's secret technique, high mountains, deep waters, long sword energy, and he won. The girl didn't have such a strong sense of honor for her sect. She curled her lips and said, Master used his trump card, and the Wu family's ancestor only used a casual move. Didn't Master still lose? Besides, Master lost even his magnanimity. The young man said gloomily, Junior sister. Because of Xianyuan Zi's appearance, the girl, who was already in a bad mood, glared at him and said, What? Are you unhappy? The young man said resentfully in a low voice, The autumn air is refreshing, the autumn air is refreshing. Li Bai suddenly reminded, Pay attention to the king of Bailiang. Su Fengnian and Xianyuan Qingfeng stood facing each other. The two of them were merely 2 zhang apart. Su Fengnian clasped his hands behind his back, his expression calm. Xianyuan Qingfeng also didn't show any signs of fatigue after a battle of life and death. However, the knot on her dress had already been loosened. The knot has been untied. However, the withered leaf appeared in Xianyuan Qingfeng's hand. He said indifferently, 3 years later, I will become an earth immortal. We will fight to the death in the great snowfield. Su Fengnian smiled and said, If I'm not dead by then, regardless of whether you become an earth immortal or not, I will go to Mount Hui to take a look. Xianyuan Qingfeng twirled the wudong leaf with his fingers. He narrowed his eyes and looked gloomy. Su Fengnian's lips moved slightly, but he didn't say anything. However, Xianyuan Qingfeng knew what he was talking about. Su Fengnian's meaning was very simple. It was too early to use him as a whetstone and defeat him to reach the peak of martial arts. Currently, in Great Peace City, Chao Changqing, Dong Tai, Su Yanbing, Chen Zhibao, and Luo Yang, these great grandmasters were all watching this place. It wasn't Xianyuan Qingfeng's turn to take the lead. Xianyuan Qingfeng didn't say anything. On the Dragon Claw Pagoda tree, Lady Hehe frowned. The branches under her but trembled slightly. However, she hesitated for a moment and still chose to sit quietly where she was. The corpse that was supposed to be dead on the street suddenly stood up, and this time, it finally made a complete strike. The corpse was like a tornado. The blade emitted a dazzling snow-white light. It was like a ball of light, tearing a trench in the ground. Shattered limestone flew everywhere. The momentum of the rolling blade was somewhat similar to when Xianyuan Qingfeng appeared. Moreover, unlike Xianyuan Qingfeng who appeared in the open, this person's sudden attack was especially treacherous and ferocious. Li Bai and the other people of Jianghu who were able to notice the abnormality at the first moment all thought that it would be a bloody close combat. However, the next moment, they felt that the scene was extremely absurd. The seemingly desperate swordsman suddenly changed direction when he was about 5 steps away from the young king. Then, with a tap of his foot, he was about to leap over the tall building. Was he planning to escape? Su Fengnian didn't even look at the leader Zhao Go. Instead, he looked at the entrance of a restaurant. That person who was moving with shocking momentum suddenly quietly hovered in the air. He didn't rise or fall. He just hung there. Li Haoran suddenly realized that this youth was like a piece of porcelain that had been hit thousands of times with a small hammer. The porcelain itself was actually already shattered, but it just didn't break apart. Leader Zhao Go, who used a secret technique to return to his youth and successfully played dead, was really dead this time. Xianyuan Qingfeng rose from the ground and flew away in a purple streak. While almost everyone was looking at the still youth or Xianyuan Qingfeng's departing figure, a middle-aged Confucian with white hair on his temples stepped over the threshold and slowly walked down the stairs. Under the sunlight, the Confucian in green robes didn't turn around to face the young king. Su Fengnian had a smile on his face. His hands were hanging by his side as he lightly shook his sleeves. At the end of the street, an ordinary-looking middle-aged swordsman first came into view, followed by a second and a third. Everyone's appearance and aura were exactly the same. However, no one was holding a sword, so it was slightly different. The leading swordsman was the famous, inverted Tai E of the Peach Blossom Sword God. He, or rather, they, kept stepping on the bluestone road that led to the Xiamawi post house. The same person, different swords. At the same time, the Confucian in green robes pinched a chess piece between two fingers. He gently released it and let it slowly fall to the ground. After the chess piece fell more than half a foot, he began to turn his back to the group of swordsmen and strode toward Su Fengnian. After the chess piece fell to the ground, the dozens of swordsmen who had already appeared on the street all began to bend their swords, regardless of their holding posture. The tip of the sword didn't move, but the body of the sword without exception began to bend downward. However, this was not the end of the strange phenomenon. The young king in the embroidered robe stood motionless in the same place. However, on both sides of him, there were two ethereal old men wearing sheepskin coats. They looked up at the sky with their hands behind their backs, as if they didn't care about the world at all. A short old man with a sword case on his back grinned, missing his front teeth. A tall and barefoot old man with white hair and linen clothes crossed his arms in an imposing manner. A tall old man in a Wudang Taoist robe slowly raised his hand and made a gesture of one finger cutting the river. A black-robed monk touched his head with a straight face. A eunuch in a red embroidered robe crossed his fingers on his abdomen. Chai Qingshan sat directly on the threshold of the restaurant without the demeanor of a grandmaster, looking at the old man wearing a pair of straw sandals beside the young king. Chai Qingshan's eyes were in a trance. The ancestor of the Wu family's sword tomb rested his elbows on the windowsill and smiled. The old eunuch in charge of the ceremony directorate saw this scene and his lips turned white. Chen Jibao finally came near the window, followed by the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tonglu. The latter looked at the senior in the red embroidered robe on the street with a complicated expression. The girl in the mink hat on the old locust tree stopped eating the pancake. No one knew if she was full or if she wanted to leave some for that person. The battle was imminent. Everyone couldn't help but hold their breaths. There was no more noise, and even the sound of a needle dropping could be heard. 3 of the 4 grandmasters in the world, the 3 earth immortals of Liyang, the new martial emperor Su Fengnian, Chao Changqing, and the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai. They gathered in the capital and stood in a tripartite balance of power. Each of them fought against 2 people. Chapter 1611. The specific process of the battle between the 3 will not be recorded in the chapters of Silent as a Cicada in Winter. See that peak battle in a few chapters. Today's morning court session in Great Peace City was unprecedentedly grand. Yonghui was the most auspicious. The court session, especially the morning court session, was, to a large extent, a direct reflection of the political situation of the Liyang dynasty. The number of people participating in the court session was often an invisible evaluation of some important officials. For example, Chen Jibao and Liu Baijie had gone to the capital to become Minister of War. Shangyin Academy Grand Chancellor Qi Yanglong had left the mountain. Great General Gu Jiantang had left the capital to take charge of the 2 liaos. This old man, son of the Song family, Yan Jinshuan's posthumous title decision, Lu Xingxiang's, Tang Tishuang's, and Su Gong's first entry into the capital, junior guardian Chen Wangxing's appointment as left scattered cavalry, the former minister of Revenue Wang Xiongui and the former minister of rights Yuan Guo's exile, the assistant minister of justice Han Lin's promotion, Liu Baijia's sad departure from the capital, and so on. Other than the civil and military officials who had to attend the morning court session every day, there were three types of people who had the right to attend the court session but did not need to. They were members of the imperial family who had the same surname as the country, members of the noble families who had earned a hereditary title due to their contributions to Liang, and old officials who had been granted special permission by the emperor to not attend the morning court session. The more people there were in the morning court session, the more prominent the position of an official would be. If there were fewer officials in the court session, such as Wang Xiongui and Yuan Guo's departure, or the old general Yang Xinxing, who had gone to Beiliang Road not long ago to become Jidushi, there were no waves. There were almost no members of the imperial family or the old officials. Although the weather had suddenly turned gloomy and rainy last night, this morning's court session could be said to be full of virtuous people. The autumn rain continued, and many of the roads in the capital were muddy. For some of the officials who had to travel through a small part of the capital to attend the morning court session, if this was in the past, they would probably be cursing on horseback or in the carriage. However, today, almost everyone was in high spirits and showed no signs of fatigue. Some of the officials who had the habit of reading in their carriages before morning court were absent-mindedly flipping through the pages of their books. From time to time, they would lift the curtains to check the address, or directly ask the coachman how long it would take to arrive. On the street where Chen Wang's house was located, his neighbors were all first-class nobles of the Liang dynasty. Apart from his father-in-law, there were also big shots like Gao Shizhi, the Duke of Yan, and Song Downing, the Marquis of Huaiyang, who had retired behind the scenes for many years. Their silence did not mean that they had lost the right to influence the direction of the court. Before dawn, the mansion was ablaze with lights. The servants had already prepared the carriages. The nobles and officials dressed in purple and yellow entered the carriages one after another. In this heavy traffic, Chen Wang's ordinary carriage was inevitably a little shabby. However, at a corner, a marquis in the front carriage, who was supposed to turn into the main street first, took the initiative to slow down and make way for Lord Chen's carriage. Chen Wang gently lifted the curtains. The marquis, who was almost 50 but still did not look old, saw Lord Chen nod to him in greeting. The old marquis smiled and returned the greeting. After putting down the curtains, he stroked his beard. He was both pleased with himself for having some dealings with the left scattered cavalry, but he also sighed with regret. Back then, the former emperor had chosen a girl from the Zhao family and nobles to marry to Chen Wang. He had a granddaughter, and there was hope. However, at that time, he only wanted to establish a relationship with a powerful duke. Looking back now, although he had fulfilled his wish and sent his granddaughter to the duke's mansion, it was a great loss compared to Chen Wang, who was a real dragon son-in-law. The Duke of Yan, Gao Shizhi, and the Marquis of Huaiyang, Song Downing, were best friends. Strangely, the two families, who were well matched in social status, did not have any marriage alliance. Speaking of which, Gao Shilian and Gao Shijing, who were born to the Duke of Yan in his later years, were quite outstanding young children in Tai and city. The Marquis of Huaiyang had many children, and they were all eating sugar cane. Therefore, it was reasonable to say that even if they were not the children of the first wife, if the men and women of the Song family who were of the same age as the Gao siblings married, it would not count as climbing up the Duke of Yan's mansion. Today, the Duke of Yan and the Marquis of Huaiyang not only had to attend the morning court, but also shared a carriage. The carriage was spacious. Before winter, the Duke, Gao Shizhi, had people add a small delicate stove to burn incense for warmth. This was to take care of his friend, Song Downing, who had caught a cold in his early years. Song Downing narrowed his eyes and dozed off. Gao Shizhi gently bent down and gently stirred the fire. Song Downing was a light sleeper and quickly opened his eyes. Gao Shizhi saw Song Downing's gaze and asked, "Do you have something to say?" Song Downing remained silent. From the corner of his eye, he glanced at the thick curtain between them and the coachman. Gao Shizhi asked again, has your old coachman finally resigned on his own? Song Downing, who was afraid of the cold in autumn, reached out his hand to close his collar and softly grunted. Gao Shizhi smiled, since that's the case, why don't you dare to speak freely? Song Downing's face was indifferent, after so many years, I'm used to it. As a brother who had gone through thick and thin, Gao Shizhi's heart was filled with sorrow. He sighed softly, in that case, we have to thank the young king who was unwilling to stop for a moment. Otherwise, even if His Majesty wanted to withdraw Zhao Go, it would not have been so fast. Song Downing said with a hoarse voice, at first, I had complaints about the previous emperor's actions. After so many years, I feel at ease. To be honest, when I occasionally went out in the past, I knew that there was a spy from the previous emperor watching me. In fact, there was nothing uncomfortable about it. Now that His Majesty has withdrawn the spy, Brother Gao, what do you think? Gao Shizhi smiled coldly and said, Brother Song, I, Gao Shizhi, am not an inexperienced official. Of course, I feel the same as you, uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. It would be better for both sides to know that as long as they do not break the window paper, there will be no problems. Now, the coachman has left on the surface, but will there be more servants and maids in the Fu in secret? Song Downing, who had always been known in Great Peace City for being wooden and taciturn, smiled meaningfully. Brother Gao, do you feel that His Majesty is not as generous as the previous emperor because of this? Gao Shizhi frowned and said, you don't think so? Song Downing shook his head and said, in my view, His Majesty's actions are not to make us feel grateful. His Majesty is not so shallow. He just gave you and me a secret edict that does not need eunuchs to do. If you do not understand the deeper meaning, there will be no seat for you in the upcoming banquet. The Duke's expression instantly became serious. He asked, what do you mean? Song Downing slowly said, ever since the first year of the auspicious talisman, Jingdo's officialdom has changed, too much for the eyes to take in. There have been many ups and downs, and it is not as simple as a few people rising up in the officialdom. In terms of civil officials, the nobles led by the Peng family of the north started to rise quickly. The Jiangnan nobles led by the Lu and Yu families suddenly rose and then suddenly fell silent. The Green Party rose from the ashes, the Hanlin Academy became independent from the Zhao family, and completely cut off all ties with the 3 provinces and 6 ministries. The new Hanlin Academy scholar is a true disciple of the emperor, and comes from a normal noble family. He does not have much connection with Zhang Lu and the 2 Liao families of Jiangnan. The establishment of the 6 pavilions is also an act of splitting power from the 3 provinces and 6 ministries. As for the generals, let's not talk about the old kings for now. Let's talk about the people who have been in and out of Jingdo in recent years. The former assistant minister of the Ministry of War Su Gong, Tang Taizhuang, the deputy general of Jizhou, Yang Huchen, and Han Fang, the one who returned to Guangling, Song Li, who held great power in Jingdo, and the general Li Chang'an, who was promoted, and the workers Huang Tianzong and Wei Dong, who just entered Jingdo. Song Laudi, Gao Shizhi mocked himself, why don't you open the window and speak frankly? I already know what you are talking about. His Majesty's general meaning can also be considered to have a rough understanding. I am a rough man, and I am not good at beating around the bush. Song Downing sighed softly and said, forget it, it is better to save some energy than to play the lute to a cow. After all, I have not attended the morning court for so many years. If I accidentally stand and faint, it will be embarrassing. Gao Shizhi waved his hand and scolded jokingly, you surnamed Song, don't think that just because you are a marquis, I don't dare to beat you. Song Downing suddenly digressed, tell Shilian and Shijing not to get too close to Yin Changgang. Oh right, and if that girl Shijing is not too opposed, why don't you set her up with Zhao Yuling's youngest son? There is a difference of a few years in age, but don't they all say that a woman 3 years older than her husband is a golden brick? These are all small matters. Gao Shizhi said bluntly, brother, how come you are the same as those short-sighted guys? Even if Yin Mao Chun is a little slower than Zhao Yuling, he has 3 provinces and 6 ministries. Not to mention the minister's decree, there are also the 2 provinces under the secretariat. Yin Mao-chun and Zhao Yuling each have a latrine pit. There is no need to fight over anything. At this point, Gao Shizhi suddenly stopped talking. Song Downing sneered, "What, have you finally thought it through? You know that one of the two is destined to lose miserably? And it is this Yin Mao-chun who has been the #1 prime minister for many years?" Gao Shizhi scratched his head in confusion and asked in a low voice, "Then why the hell are the two children getting married?" Chapter 16:12. Song Downing said indifferently, "Don't forget, Yin Chang'eng and Zhao Chuanyuan's marriage was the late emperor's idea. Yin and Zhao pushed the boat along with the current, each leaving a way out for the other's descendants." The Duke clicked his tongue and said, "This bunch of scholars, they really have a lot of cunning guts." Song Downing sighed softly and said, "Scholars have a lot of cunning minds, while martial artists refuse to be controlled. Since His Majesty ascended the throne, it has actually been quite difficult. What's not easy is that His Majesty has done very well." Gao Shizhi stared at this good friend of his, who had nothing to hide from him, and asked in a deep voice, "Have you decided? Are you really going to help His Majesty keep the various civil officials and military forces in check?" Song Downing didn't answer the question and took a deep breath. "Although our neighbors of various surnames have been suppressed by Bai Yan for so many years, we can't deny that there's a world of difference between the imperial court with and without Bai Yan in charge. Since Bai Yan is gone, then even if we don't consider the country, we still have to be worthy of those ancestral tablets that we have to pay respects to every year." Gao Shizhi stretched. "In any case, I'll do what you do. It's that simple, I won't waste my energy." Song Downing suddenly laughed. "Do you still remember the things when you were young?" Gao Shizhi was stunned. "What things?" "The two of us did a lot of magnificent things when we were young." "What are you asking?" "Hey, Wang Yuanran, that bunch of good-for-nothing brats, compared to us in the past, they're worlds apart." Song Downing subconsciously rubbed his chest, and then pointed at the face of this illustrious duke in front of him. The latter's face instantly flushed red. Gao Shizhi cursed, and his entire arrogance disappeared. Song Downing laughed out loud for the first time. At that time, many years ago, his young Marquis Song Downing and his good brother Gao Shizhi were riding on the outskirts of the capital with their retainers. In the end, they met a woman. That woman was truly devastatingly beautiful. Even the arrogant Song Downing was shocked by her beauty. Song Downing and Gao Shizhi were not able to defeat him. They suffered some punches and kicks. However, the two rich men had the advantage in numbers. Soon, they chased after the bastard and beat him up. Their faces were covered in dirt. The key was that this guy was good at fighting, but his mouth was so good that he could curse people 100 times without repeating a word. Song Downing and Gao Shizhi were not able to defeat him. Song Downing and Gao Shizhi were punched and kicked by him. However, the two rich men had the advantage in numbers. Soon, they chased after the bastard and beat him up. The point was that this guy was good at fighting, but his mouth was really good at cursing people without repeating 100 times. How was this a hero saving a damsel in distress? This was clearly a disgrace. It had nothing to do with heroic spirit. It was clearly an internal conflict between two groups of lechers. Neither of them was a good person. Then Song Downing was kicked 7 or 8 zhang by the woman with the sword on her back. Gao Shizhi was slapped and spun 7 or 8 times in the air. Then the young man from Liaodong charged in front of the woman with a face full of gratefulness. He grabbed her hand and said some words of gratitude. He was not willing to let go. Gao Shizhi and Song Downing only found out much later about that bastard surnamed Su. His fate was not much better than theirs. His entire body was sent flying far away. After he fell heavily on the ground, he still gritted his teeth and squeezed out an ugly smile. He shouted with all his might, "You are my, Su Zhao's wife. Either you kill me, or you marry me." In the past, as long as Su Zhao was in Great Peace City, there would be no lack of excitement. Now, his son had come to Great Peace City. It seemed to be very lively. The Duke of Yen and the Marquis of Huaiyang were very disappointed. Because in the morning court session, the young vassal king who had caused a great disturbance did not appear. In comparison, the other news only slightly lifted the spirits of the officials. Wu Zhongshuan, the top general of the south under Zhao Bing of Yan, had secretly left Guangling Road and went north. He suddenly appeared in the court of the capital and was promoted to the Minister of War of Liang. At the same time, he was ordered to immediately return to Guangling Road to supervise the war. He would lead the Ministry of War as the great general of the south. When the rebellion was successfully quelled, he would officially go to the capital. Early in the morning, a carriage slowly stopped at the old site of the Ministry of War of Liang. This place was only 1 li away from the Zhao family. Before the change of location, the Liang dynasty, which was called the Barbarians of the North by the 8 countries of the South, had the position of the Ministry of War in the 3 provinces and 6 ministries. It was beyond the imagination of the people of Liang. At that time, not to mention the Ministry of Personnel, as long as you were not a general of a local town, even if you were the head of the Secretariat of the Hall of Secretaries or the left servant of the Minxia province, you would have to obediently make way for the assistant minister of the Ministry of War's carriage. As to those arrogant imperial censors, their only use at that time was to be the punching bag for the officials of the Ministry of War. It was not strange for them to be whipped half to death for no reason. 2 emperors, in a short 40 years, had made the Central Plains recognize the orthodox position of Liang. Countless scholars took root and sprouted in Great Peace City, a former border city. They grew into trees that reached the sky, and formed a place where scholars did not lose to West Chu. The young person who walked down from the carriage stood at the bottom of the steps. He looked dazedly at the vermilion lacquered door that almost no one entered. Right now, this was just the place where the low-level officials of the armory of the Ministry of War handled government affairs. A sleepy-eyed minor official of the armory stepped over the threshold. When he saw the black and gold embroidered robe that he had never heard of or seen before, he rubbed his eyes hard, his expression blank. Great Peace City, the foot of the Son of Heaven. Who dared to overstep on the matter of official robes? Much less at the level of an embroidered robe. The person who was just a minor official of the armory froze. He did not dare to take a step forward, nor did he dare to turn around and pretend he did not see anything. A rough voice sounded behind the minor official. Huang Qianshan. Why aren't you going to the Ministry of War Yamen to report to Manager Hong? Did your boots get stuck in dog shit? The minor official swallowed, turned his head and said, Official Yang, someone has come. The tall man behind the minor official, who had also not left the ranks of the corrupt, walked around the person surnamed Huang. When he saw the young person, he gave him a few glances and then silently turned around. He then ran through the door with lightning speed and disappeared completely. Done in one go. This was probably the reason why Huang Qianshan had called him Official Yang. Official Yang's run had completely blocked off Huang Qianshan's path of retreat. If he ran again, even Huang Qianshan felt that it was not right. This minor official forced himself to run down the stone steps. He bent down and asked, Do you? When he said this, he suddenly choked. Just now, in his panic, he did not dare to carefully identify the number of the black and gold embroidered robe, the number of toes, and the water feet. How could he know whether to call the young person in front of him Duke, Marquis, or His Royal Highness? There were too many ways to be an official in Great Peace City. Just the residences of the officials were divided into the rich and powerful. When they went to each place, they had to burn different incense. Otherwise, if they went to the wrong temple and burned the wrong incense, breaking the rules and taboo, it would be a minor matter to sit on the bench in the yamen for a few years. Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, This king is just here to take a look. You do not have to report anything to the yamen. This king. Hearing this shocking title, the minor official's legs went soft and he almost fell to the ground. In the large Liang dynasty, there were not many people who could call themselves this king. Now, a few of them had died. And the so-called king on the same level, who were given the title of king after the emperor ascended the throne, according to the laws of the Zhao dynasty, were still not allowed to enter the capital. Then, since this king in front of him was so young, his identity was clear. The officials in the capital all knew what kind of person the king of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, was. Don't talk about him wearing an embroidered robe and strolling around. He would rather stay in his residence and not see anyone. The minor official's teeth chattered and said, Bei. King of Biyao, is there anything you need me to do? Su Fengnian smiled and said, didn't official Yang just ask you to go to the Ministry of War? The minor official with sweat on his forehead said, it's okay. It's the first time King has come. Our Yamen is so honored. Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, go. Just when the minor official was about to bow and run away, he heard the notorious Northwest King said softly, Huang Qianshan, remember to say loudly before you leave, Yamen is an important place. Without the permission of the Ministry of War, no one is allowed to enter. The obedient Huang Qianshan's mind went blank. It wasn't until Huang Qianshan had obediently shouted out and walked far away that the belated Armory Division petty official finally woke up with a start. He was so scared that he could only walk shakily with his hands on the wall. He thought to himself, am I looking for death? But when he walked for a long distance, he seemed to suddenly think of something. He looked back and saw the young king who was still standing in the same place, the young man who he often scolded and ridiculed together with his colleagues a few years ago. Huang Qianshan's eyes were complicated. He sighed and turned away. The minor official, who was afraid that he would not be qualified to participate in the court meeting in his life, gradually lost his fear and suspicion. But for some reason, he felt a little uncomfortable. Chapter 1613. When Su Fengnian boarded the carriage, Su Yanbing asked, why don't you go in and take a look? Su Fengnian smiled and said, the place where Su Xiao pretended to be a grandson when he was young. I won't go in. Su Yanbing smiled knowingly and nodded. General should be thinking the same. The carriage headed toward the nearby Zhao family. Just as court was ending, many carriages headed toward them. After all, other than the powerful 6 ministries, there were many other yamens of various sizes in the capital. Carriages and officials on horseback brushed past this inconspicuous carriage. Su Yanbing stopped the carriage outside the Ministry of Rites Yamen. The carriages and mounts of the officials of the Ministry of Rites had already taken up all the space, causing the wide path in and out of the yamen to be extremely crowded. There was no way around it. The Ministry of Rites was the most important and noble place of the dynasty. It was very busy to receive and send off people. Many officials of other ministries who had not been willing to step half a step into the Ministry of Rites would occasionally come to the Ministry of Rites to find a doctor to talk about old times and get close to him. As for the Minister of Rites Sima Puhua and left Assistant Minister Jean Lanting, there was no hope. Unless it was someone of the assistant minister level, it was impossible to meet them. Speaking of which, when one reached the position of assistant minister, one could not put down their face. Of course, there was no need to use such a crude method to get close to others. So when Su Yanbing casually stopped at a spot, a minor official from the Ministry of Rites quickly walked over. He did not immediately order Su Yanbing around. There were many serpents in Great Peace City. There were many bloody precedents, and they had learned a principle. It would not be wrong to be kind to others and endure as much as possible. Being a coward was better than being a tortoise that stuck its head out and got chopped off, right? The minor official quickly rejoiced at his cautiousness. When he saw the clothing of the young person who had raised the curtain, he immediately understood. As expected of someone from the Ministry of Rites. Compared to the absurd comical actions of the 2 people from the Armory Bureau of the Ministry of War, this person quickly bowed deeply and said respectfully, this official greets the King of Biyao. Su Fengnian got off the carriage, nodded, and walked straight to the Ministry of Rites Yamen. The official from the Ministry of Rites didn't dare to stand up even after Su Fengnian had walked through the door. It was as if he couldn't wait to bow until the end of time. The one who led the way for the young king was an extremely unlucky official from the Ministry of Rites. He happened to meet the King of Biyao on a narrow road, and there was nowhere for him to escape. His subordinates also instantly distanced themselves from the official. They didn't even have the slightest awareness of sacrificing themselves for justice. Is it not easy to enter the Ministry of Rites? If he did not have a familiar person of sufficient rank to lead the way, would the other officials of the Ministry of Rights, who had suppressed their resentment for many years, make things difficult for him? The truth was, of course, the truth. However, would the person in front of him care about these shitty rules? When he was still Biyao and His Royal Highness, he could already carry a sword to court. So when the official from the Ministry of Rights heard that the king of Biyao wanted to see the old minister, he didn't even dare to fart. He bowed and led the way. He only said that after the minister left court, there would be a political discussion in the imperial study that would not be shaken even by thunder, and that the king might have to wait for a while. When Su Fengnian walked into Sima Puhua's room, he didn't refuse the official from the Ministry of Rights who served him tea. Seeing the young king standing in front of the minister's favorite painting, frogs croaking out of the mountain spring, and admiring it, the official from the Ministry of Rights carefully handed him a cup of hot tea. Only then did the official from the Ministry of Rights remember one thing. After Baoyang's hereditary title was abolished, this young man was scolded for recklessly wasting God's gift, wantonly inscribing on priceless authentic paintings, and even simply stamping the word fake. At first, it was unknown how many officials in the capital and scholars of the Central Plains, after receiving the paintings from the Baoyang Palace, all beat their chests and stamped their feet. They couldn't wait to catch the young man from Wutongan and beat him up. However, they didn't expect that in just a few years, they would immediately change their attitude and laugh from ear to ear. The reason was very simple. No matter how much the leaders of the scholarly circles resisted these paintings from the young king's hands, as long as you were willing to sell them, the price of the next person would at least double. Even so, there was still a price but no market. Thinking of this, the official from the Ministry of Rights felt a little guilty. When Jean Lanting, who hated Baoyang the most, entered the Ministry of Rights and took the second position, he reluctantly parted with his treasures and publicly sold several paintings to show his loyalty. However, he still secretly kept a cool invitation, thinking that one day when he was old and left the officialdom to return to his hometown, he would take it out and show it off to others. Perhaps one day when he was at a critical moment in his official career, he would sell the small invitation with only 2 words, at a low price, to his early imperial examination master. Giving it away for free? Dream on. Cool invitation, cool mountain. Just based on the 2 extremely special words, cool, the official estimated that it was worth 500 taels of silver. Gold. After Su Fengnian finished his tea, he walked to the desk and casually opened an exquisite sandalwood box. Inside, there were 6 ingots of ink neatly arranged. Taking out one of the ingots, the twin dragons spat out pearls to draw golden lines, with the seal script, Hua Zhang Huan Kai, in the middle. It was clearly a tribute ink from the court of the old southern Tang ink master Chuji. A rare item like this, after being passed around for decades, would now be something on the desk of the officials of Liyang. However, compared to the refugees of the spring and autumn period who had also left their homes, these inanimate objects seemed to be much more fortunate. They were able to survive until a knowledgeable scholar loved them so much that he couldn't put them down. Many refugees of a fallen country could only die in a foreign land. Minister Sima Puhua still hadn't returned to the Ministry of Rights Yamen. The official from the side, suffering, the official from the doctor's face grew paler and paler. There was a cough outside the door, and the official from the Department for Purging officials quietly walked out of the room. He saw a good relationship with the minister-counselor of the Department for Purging officials. He was a good person who had been a minister-counselor for over 10 years and still hadn't been promoted. The latter quietly said with a sad face, "Sir Lu," when the minister reached the Yamen door, he turned around and left. He said he had to go to the Ministry of Door to take care of business. He also said that we must not let the prince know. He told us to only say that today's meeting will take a long time and that he may not be able to leave the palace before noon. He also told us to take good care of the prince. Whoever makes a mistake will be punished. Hearing this grievous news, the official almost jumped up and cursed. He resisted the urge to run away on the spot and took several deep breaths outside the room, as if his heart and liver were in pain. At this time, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration. The official whispered in the ear of the minister-counselor. The latter had a troubled expression. The official patted the latter's shoulder heavily and said in a resolute and decisive tone, "Hurry up and go." After explaining the matter, the official returned to the room as if he was walking on thin ice. He tried his best to speak in a calm tone to the young prince. When he spoke, his face was full of sincerity and guilt. A few years ago, when he secretly gathered a servant girl from the manor to catch the fierce woman in bed, he didn't see the official from the doctor's side like this. Su Fengnian glanced at him and expressionlessly said, "Minister isn't here, but Assistant Minister Jiang and Jean Lanting should be here, right?" The official didn't have time to think about the meaning of the two different titles. He pecked at the rice and said, "Minister Jiang is here, he is here." Originally, Minister Jiang asked for leave and temporarily returned to the Yamen to take care of government affairs. After Minister Jean left the court, he directly returned to the Ministry of Rites. He is also here. Compared to the Shang study room, which was like a crane in a flock of chickens, the rooms of the two ministers of the Ministry of Rites were each occupied by one person. However, the rooms were connected to several other officials, so it didn't seem to be as unique. The Ministry of Rites was a place that taught people rules. Its own rules were complicated to the point of nitpicking. Chapter 1614. Su Fengnian and the doctor walked towards the room of Right Assistant Minister Jiang Yongla. As a result, the doctor found that Jiang Yongla was panting after running all the way back. He didn't care about maintaining his composure in front of this humble official. When the doctor saw the Right Assistant Minister, there was only one thought in his mind. "Lord Jiang, take care of yourself. It is not that this lowly official wants to drag you into the water, but the minister has already ruthlessly tricked this lowly official. If I don't get someone to trick and scare you back, this lowly official may not live to see the sun tomorrow." Actually, there's a Jianghu slang that the little bastard in this humble official's family used as his pet phrase. Now that I think about it, it's really reasonable. In Jianghu, one has to be a Taoist who doesn't die. To be honest, if Lord Jiang dies suddenly, this humble official will definitely try my best to shoulder the burden of the Ministry of Rites. After inviting the Prince of Northern Liang into the house, Jiang Yongla closed the door and didn't say anything. He just knelt on the ground and refused to get up. Even Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Actually, it was completely opposite to what the outside world imagined. From Su Shao to Li Yishan to Su Fengnian, Biyao had long known about the posthumous title. Su Fengnian refused to accept the imperial edict after the hereditary posthumous title. Even the eunuch who announced the imperial edict was not allowed to enter Yuzhou province. This was Su Fengnian's responsibility as a son and the attitude that Biyao had to show. However, it didn't mean that Su Fengnian bore a deep grudge against Jiang Yongla, a small figure in the Ministry of Rites. Additionally, among all the civil and military officials in the imperial court, only the left chancellor of the imperial college, Yao Baifeng, stood up for Su Shao. The others, such as Grand Secretary Yan Jieshi, Jean Lanting, and Lu Xingxiang, were much more vicious than Jiang Yongla in their suggestions on the posthumous title evaluation. In fact, at that time, Su Shao and Li Yishan were laughing and discussing his posthumous affairs. They said that he would definitely be given a bad posthumous name. Coincidentally, Su Shao, who rarely flipped through books, would often go to Wutongan to take out the books from the Ministry of Rites when he was bored to death. In the end, the two characters that Su Shao chose for himself were precisely Wu Li. "I, Su Shao, am a military man. Why would I need a military official to have the word literary?" The character, Li, was even better. It was a meritorious deed to the country. Too much slaughter was carried out, and the merits offset the demerits. Just take it as I, Su Shao, and Li Yang's debt is settled. Of course, Su Fengnian didn't have any hatred for Jiang Yongla, but that didn't mean that he would be nice to the number 3 person in the Ministry of Rites. But for such a great assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites to kneel there and act like a rascal, Su Fengnian's eyes were opened. A short while later, when the young vassal king walked out of the room, the doctor of the Department for Purging officials heard sobbing from inside the room. The doctor felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders, but he also felt some regret deep in his heart. Su Fengnian walked to the outside of the room of the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rites. The door was wide open, and the elegant Jean Lanting was sitting calmly behind the desk. He looked at the young vassal king who had once been high above. This third junior Jean, who had quickly risen through the bureaucracy of Great Peace City, showed no fear and looked coldly at him. Jean Lanting narrowed his eyes and didn't move. He didn't even rise to greet him. You have become the king of Biyao through hereditary succession and have taken another step forward. But I, Jean Lanting, am no longer a minor landowning household of that little county. Then the doctor of the department for purging officials heard the king of Biyao say, "Move further away." This young man who held the 300,000 cavalry of Biyao did not close the door after stepping over the threshold. But no one dared to raise their head to see what was happening inside. Soon, a loud sound came from inside the room. The department for purging officials jumped in fright and trembled all over. After an unknown amount of time, the young vassal king walked out of the room. He lightly patted his dust-free sleeves and left. The department for purging officials was hesitating about whether to enter the room when they heard the left assistant minister, who paid the most attention to his speech and actions, yell at the top of his lungs, "All of you, scram." The entire Ministry of Rights Yamen had the bone-chilling coldness of winter. Su Fengnian walked towards the carriage. Seeing Su Yanbing's curious gaze, he said with a smile, "I didn't kill anyone, but there are people who feel worse than death." Su Yanbing's gaze was slightly strange. Su Fengnian helplessly said, "I didn't take off my pants. But if you have this kind of hobby, I can take you there." Now, that guy is probably still weeping. Su Yanbing hurriedly waved his hand and laughed. Su Yanbing finally stopped laughing. When Su Fengnian was about to get into the carriage, he asked, "Are we going to the Imperial Astronomer next?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Yes." Su Yanbing suddenly looked sideways at a group of people on the street in the distance. They were all riding horses. It had been some time since the court session ended, so the road was not congested. But the momentum of the 5 riders was very conspicuous. Su Fengnian lifted the side curtain when Su Yanbing turned his head. Other than the leader of the 5 riders who did not look at them, the other 4 riders all had unfriendly expressions. One of the riders even stopped his horse in front of them. He held the reins with one hand and leaned back slightly, full of arrogance and conceit. Su Yanbing said softly, "Look at that old man's official robe. It seems to be the second-rank military official's robe that only the great generals of the 4 campaigns and the Minister of War can wear." Su Fengnian said, "It should be Wu Zhongshuan, who was previously conferred the title of Great General of the Southern Expedition. It seems that he has come to the capital to receive his reward. Perhaps he has already become the Minister of War. No wonder his subordinates are so arrogant and despotic." Su Yanbing frowned and said, "Do you want me to teach him a lesson?" Su Fengnian, who was separated by a curtain, shook his head and said, "Forget it. Wu Zhongshuan still has some ties with someone. If you want to teach him a lesson, let him do it himself in the future." Just as Su Fengnian was about to ignore the provocation in the other's eyes, the other stopped his horse and raised his hand to make a hand across his neck. Su Yanbing said calmly, "Your Highness, you can't just let me go back and forth and be a cart driver, right?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Okay. Remember not to hit too hard." Su Yanbing asked, "Half dead?" Su Fengnian replied, "The other party is not a weak civil official. There is no glory in beating him. However, he is a general of Nanjiang who has been through hundreds of battles. Half dead is not enough. If you don't beat him half dead, you will be letting down their reputation of being comparable to the Biyao cavalry." Su Yanbing, who had let go of the reins, could not help but smile and said, "There is such a reason." Su Fengnian put down the curtain and said slowly, "As long as the Biyao cavalry is there, it is the reason." Su Yanbing disappeared in a flash. In the next scene, Su Yanbing kicked the side of the large horse's abdomen. The Nanjiang general was sent flying along with his horse. The horse's 4 hooves flew into the air and landed heavily in the distance with a loud crash. No one saw how Su Yanbing attacked. The tall and sturdy general who had not yet rolled off the horse was kicked 50 or 60 feet away. Fortunately, this street, which was second only to the Imperial Road in the capital, was wide enough. Otherwise, he would have sunk into the wall. Su Yanbing stepped on the head of the dying general and looked at the other riders. Other than Wu Zhongshuan, who had calmly turned his horse around, everyone was furious. Su Yanbing did not say anything. He only used the sole of his shoe to pinch the general's head. Biyao does not care if you are an official of the Ministry of War. Who cares if you are a Nanjiang general? Wu Zhongshuan raised his whip slightly and stopped the three irascible riders from trying to retaliate. The old general, who was now wearing a standard second-rank lion official robe, slowly rode forward alone. He looked down at Su Yanbing and asked knowingly, "Biyao Su Yanbing?" Su Yanbing replied indifferently, "Did you bring 1,000 or 2,000 elite soldiers to be stationed in the Jingji Southern Army camp? Otherwise, I'm afraid there won't be enough for supper tonight." Wu Zhongshuan's mouth twitched and he turned to leave. The three riders under his command galloped toward the general, whose life or death was unknown, to clean up the mess. Su Fengnian sat in the carriage, his hands folded like an old farmer's sleeves. His 10 fingers were interlocked and trembling slightly. The imperial astronomer was about to arrive. The source of the white clothes case in the capital was here. The spring and autumn saber armor died here. Chapter 16:15. There was a rumor that there was a famous little restaurant called Jianghu Restaurant beside the Longshu Ditch overpass, which was used to suppress the water veins in the capital. There was an endless stream of high-ranking officials and dignitaries. The proprietress was a charming widow, but there had never been any rumors about her in the past few years. No matter how much the aristocratic Gongsun family and the descendants of the Jianghu Restaurant fought over a table, no matter how much the two sides fought, the Jianghu Restaurant, which seemed to be under the protection of a big shot, would always open the next day. If one was late, as long as it was time for the restaurant to close, no matter if one was the son of a minister or the grandson of a great general, they would all close the door and refuse to serve. The more the Jianghu Restaurant was like this, the more the old gluttons in the capital liked it. Although it was very likely that a big shot like the assistant minister would be scolded by an audacious waiter when they went to the restaurant, everyone enjoyed it and never got tired of it. The two masters of the Song family, Tantanan and Huan Wen, the imperial college's Yao Baifeng, and almost all the ministers of the 6 ministries other than Gu Jiantang, as well as the central government officials, all came here to feast without exception. This year, there was another big shot, Qi Yanglong. It was said that before the head of the secretariat officially became a minister of Liyang, the first thing he did when he entered the capital was not to meet the emperor, but to go straight to the Jianghu Restaurant and get drunk. What was even more exaggerated was that this well-deserved leader of the literati was almost chased out of the Jianghu Restaurant by the proprietress. Today, the business of the Jianghu Restaurant was still booming. The main entrance had not opened yet, but the luxurious carriages and tall horses outside had already made the street near the river extremely crowded. Many diners were patiently waiting in a long line. A short, crippled old man came to the entrance of the backyard of the Jianghu Restaurant. Compared to the bustling main entrance, this narrow alley, which no one knew how to enter through many turns, was extremely cold and cheerless. Perhaps it was because there were few people here, but there were some dark green moss growing near the foot of the wall. The sunlight was blocked by the high wall, making it seem somewhat gloomy. The crippled old man was not in a hurry to knock on the door. Instead, he stared at a young man squatting on the steps and yawning. The young man also stared at the crippled old man with his mouth and eyes wide open. In fact, they knew each other. The old man, who usually only paid attention to the princes and ministers, remembered this rascal because the young ruffian had appeared on the street outside the Jianghu Restaurant yesterday and had a battle with the young princes. When the crippled old man returned to Jianghu, he returned to Jianghu. Jianghu of Jianghu. This guy. Originally, the old man had roughly confirmed that the so-called first young master of Jinzhou and second machete of Liaodong was not a spy who could not see the light of day, but a street scoundrel who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth and was unintentionally involved in the whirlpool in the capital. However, when he saw Wu Laifu appear at this time and place, Zhao Go, who had always believed that there were no outsiders and no foreign affairs in the world, was filled with killing intent. Wu Laifu, who put the iron saber on his knees, suddenly shouted, "Old man, I know you. Although you didn't make a move yesterday, I know that you're actually the same as me. We're both experts. Wu Laifu put on a fake smile. He was thinking about how to kill this guy quietly. Jianghu restaurant was Zhaoguo's forbidden area. Liang spies were not allowed to approach it, regardless of their status. This was a rigid rule set by Yuan Benshi. Although Master Yuan was dead, the crippled old man did not want to disturb the woman who lived in seclusion because of a trivial matter, unless it was absolutely necessary. This time, the crippled old man broke Master Yuan's rule. He had no choice but to come here because the new head of Zhaoguo had spoken. The crippled old man, who even the king of Biyao and Fu Shuifang only knew his surname was Yao, looked at the young man who was carefully holding the saber and asked with a smile, "Young hero Wu, how do you have the leisure to squat here and look at the sun?" Wu Laifu's martial arts skills were mediocre, but he wasn't stupid at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to steal the limelight before Li Haoran. Now, the name Wu Laifu was quite famous in the capital. Yesterday, Wu Laifu had returned twice and witnessed the battle from beginning to end. Among them, the aging of the middle-aged man and the death of the youth with the saber made him gasp in amazement. Therefore, the lame old man who had not revealed his strength from beginning to end was naturally not someone that Wu Laifu could compete with. Therefore, Wu Laifu was very nervous. His palms were sweaty, but he still maintained his annoying smile and said, "Senior, isn't looking at the sun the same everywhere? I came to Jianghu restaurant to ask for a job. I walked from Liaodong to the capital and used up all my traveling expenses. I'm not a martial artist who breaks the law. I'm a good citizen who abides by the law." The crippled old man smiled and said, "Looking for a job? The capital is so big. Can't you find a job anywhere?" The young man's smile became more and more stiff. He rolled his eyes and hesitated for a moment. Then, he lowered his voice and said, "Senior, we're both open-minded people, so I might as well be frank with you. Everyone in the capital knows that Jianghu restaurant is very deep. I'm thinking that a woman can support such a restaurant. Either she's a hidden peerless expert, or the waiter in the restaurant is a top-notch martial arts grandmaster, or maybe a chef is a famous martial artist who has retired from the martial arts world for many years. I came to Jianghu restaurant to find a job. Earning money is secondary. My main goal is to learn from an expert who can dominate the martial arts world." The crippled old man stared at this whimsical young man. He did not know if he should slap him to death or give him a thumbs up and praise him for being so king smart. The crippled old man looked at the guy who had an incomparably sincere gaze and a face full of innocence, and could not help but tease, "If I remember correctly, young hero Wu is an expert who only lost to the king of Biyao by 1.5 moves. Why? Are you only satisfied after reaching a higher level in the martial arts world?" Wu Laifu smiled foolishly and said, "There's no harm in having more skills. There are hidden dragons and crouching tigers in the martial arts world. It's not a bad thing for me to learn a few more trump cards. Look at the king of Biyao. His fists, swords, and that last move, God summoning. He has endless tricks up his sleeves. Compared to him, I'm still a little lacking." The crippled old man smiled and said, "In my opinion, young hero Wu is much stronger than the king of Biyao if you have such skills." Wu Laifu asked softly, "Don't tell me I'm thick-skinned." The crippled old man gave him a thumbs up and said, "Young hero Wu, you're indeed a talented martial arts genius. Your future achievements in martial arts will definitely be limitless." The young man scratched his head. He accepted the compliment with a smile. For some reason, the crippled old man no longer wanted to kill him. He ignored the young hero of Liaodong and walked up the stairs. He gently knocked on the door. There was no response from the backyard. The crippled old man knocked on the door unhurriedly. The old man was not in a hurry. Wu Laifu went from being curious, speculating, and anticipating to yawning, rolling his eyes, and picking his earwax. He really could not wait any longer. Wu Laifu stood up and put on his iron saber. Then, he slammed the wooden door heavily with his palm and shouted, "Lady boss, lady boss. I'm Wu Laifu, the one who wanted to be your waiter yesterday. It's fine if you don't open the door for me, but there's a respectable Jianghu senior beside me who's anxiously looking for you. Don't delay the important matter. Lady boss, it's true. I'm not deceiving you. There really is a senior who came to visit. He's been waiting here for a long time. I was afraid that he would disturb your rest at first, so I blocked him for a long time without any courtesy. Lady boss. You see, if you still don't open the door, whether it's Jianghu ethics or the principle that visitors are guests, lady boss, you won't be able to win against him. The crippled old man twitched the corner of his mouth and endured. Wu Laifu slammed the door, earth-shattering. When the door suddenly opened, Wu Laifu did not pay attention and almost slapped the person who opened the door. Fortunately, the person gently moved away and dodged. However, Wu Laifu fell into the door and fell flat on his face. That was a glimpse. It made Wu Laifu sit on the ground in a daze. That young woman was definitely not the lady boss. The lady boss was a middle-aged woman who was quite feminine. However, Wu Laifu was not interested in women like that. He preferred a young woman who was about the same age as him. She had to have a pretty face, a big chest, a thin waist, a round buttocks, and long legs. His requirements were not high and were just in line with his identity as a young hero. The woman who opened the door was the most beautiful woman Wu Laifu had ever seen in his life. She might even be the most beautiful woman in his next life. Wu Laifu sat on the ground and looked at the back of the person who stood at the door. This young man who dared to play tricks with the king of Biyao did not even dare to speak to her. As the second minister of justice, the crippled old man looked at the woman who was famous for her rouge and hesitated to speak. She was supposed to be one of Teacher Yuan's most outstanding experts, but the world was unpredictable. Even Teacher Yuan, who had a perfect plan, fell short of success. There was a game of chess on the chessboard that year. Although Teacher Yuan had thought of a series of rules, it was a pity that someone made the unreasonable move in the end. In that game, Teacher Yuan claimed that he and Huang Sanjiao lost to the same person. It was a great regret of his life. Looking at the old man who had personally escorted her to the capital, the woman said indifferently, "Teacher Yao, are you here to urge me to go to the mansion of the Prince of Liaodong?" The crippled old man sighed and shook his head. "No, I'm here to see shopkeeper Hong." She frowned and shook her head, "And Hong won't see you." The old man also shook his head and called her by her name, "Qin Yu, you don't have the final say in this matter." Qin Yu. After hearing this name, Wu Laifu felt like he was struck by lightning. Rouge Champion. Chapter 16:16. The mysterious woman with the surname Nangong could only comment that she was not inferior to Qin Yu. After all, the third person in Yanji's evaluation was the former princess of West Chu, the current empress of West Chu, Jiang and I. Qin Yu remained silent. Even the old man, who was no longer attracted to beauty, could not help but be moved by her beauty no matter how many times he saw her. It was no wonder that even Mr. Yuan praised her back then, a calamity in troubled times, an empress in prosperous times. Wu Laifu suddenly kicked him in the back, and once again, he fell flat on his face with dirt all over. A woman stood beside Wu Laifu. She did not approach the courtyard door and looked at the crippled old man who did not cross the threshold. She said coldly, "The Jianghu embassy has no bones for you to pick on." The crippled old man who was called a dog was expressionless. He gently flicked his finger and Wu Laifu's head swayed backward as if it was hit hard. He fell to the ground and could not get up. Then the old man said softly, "Shopkeeper Hong, it was the Empress' intention to ask you to leave the Jianghu embassy this time." The lady boss did not speak. Qin Yu lowered her eyes. The crippled old man waited quietly for her to continue. The lady boss finally spoke, her tone full of sarcasm. "What, do you want me to stop you at the palace gate? Or just wait outside the main hall? If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place? Are you finally afraid now?" The old man's eyelids trembled. He said, "The Empress' order is, for shopkeeper Hong to go to the imperial astronomer." After saying this, the old man, who never hesitated whether he was talking or killing, emphasized the last three words for the first time. Imperial astronomer. The lady boss, who had been calm, suddenly became furious. Scram! She pointed at the crippled old man and said angrily, "Yao. Go back to the palace and tell that shameless woman. My relationship with Zhao Ji isn't that good." The old man seemed to have expected the woman's attitude. He continued with a straight face, "The Empress asked me to pass 2 words to shopkeeper Hong. One is that if shopkeeper Hong is willing to go to the imperial astronomer, then Qin Yu will not be the princess consort of the Liao Palace." The woman was so angry that she laughed. Zhao Ji, the entire Liang knows that you favor Zhao Zhuan, far more than Zhao Wu. Not only did you force the eldest son to give the throne to his brother, but now you're even forsaken the pitiful compensation that the eldest son should have received. Qin Yu turned a deaf ear as if she was an outsider. Beiliang His Royal Highness, Emperor Zhao Dun, the first Zhao Wu, and Zhao Zhuan, the 4th prince. Back then, as one of the 10 great clans of the spring and autumn period, they wanted her to enter the capital and become the imperial noble consort first before fighting for the position of empress. Huang of the emperor, the Jiao to the Jianghu Jiao. Later, Mr. Yuan, who spoke vaguely, asked her to get close to the 4th prince, who had not yet married Yan Dongwu. Empress. Empresses, Liao, Prince, Zhao, she, to, the Liao, Prince of the Liao Emperor of the Emperor. Empress. Chen. Her grandfather, who was once famous for his strength of character in the Central Plains, only told her before his death that she was needed for the revival of the family. Her master, whose identity was hidden and whom she respected, only smiled and said that there was a book that should be written like this. Benshi, who had a half-inch tongue, only dipped his finger in wine and wrote 6 words on the table in front of her, "You're the empress, and I'll live an ignoble life." In the end, she was summoned to the palace. Looking at the woman from afar, she only saw the woman nod and let her out of the palace. She didn't resist even once. Qin Yu never yearned for the Jianghu because she knew that the men in the Jianghu seemed to be glorious, but in fact, they were all helpless. She also never yearned for the imperial palace because she knew that the women there were all caged birds. Qin Yu knew what she didn't want, but she never knew what she wanted. Therefore, she let nature take its course time and time again. Qin Yu couldn't say that she was sad, nor did she have any self-pity. She was like duckweed drifting with the current. When Qin Yu heard Auntie Hong, who taught her paper cutting, tell the crippled old man to get lost again, Qin Yu didn't feel sad at all. Was it important whether she went to Liaodong or not and whether she became a princess? The old man looked at the woman who had been a widow for many years. The old man wasn't angry. She was a legendary woman who could make the former emperor and Mr. Yuan look at her differently. Even if she punched his head, the old man wouldn't care. The old man said calmly, "Shopkeeper Hong, the empress' second sentence is that Xia Guining is already in the imperial astronomer, and Prince of Shu, Chen Jibao, may also be there." The woman instantly quieted down and her lips turned pale. She closed her eyes in pain and murmured, "Zhao Ji, you've always been like this. In the past, you could ignore everything for your man, but now for your son." The old man looked at the sky and reminded her, "If you don't go now, it'll be too late." She slowly opened her eyes and asked, "Is the carriage ready?" The old man nodded. The woman walked to the door. When she passed by Qin Yu, she suddenly held her hand and said softly, "Go with Auntie Hong. If we die there, it'll be good." Qin Yu thought about it and smiled. The imperial astronomer wasn't famous in the marketplace, but it was one of the most important places in Liang's capital. Many officials of the 3 provinces and 6 ministries never had the chance to set foot there. Therefore, whether or not an official could borrow a book or 2 from the imperial astronomer's library became a benchmark to measure the status of an official in the capital. Before Liu Baijie resigned as the Minister of War, the last thing he did was secretly transfer 800 elite soldiers from the inner city imperial army to guard the imperial astronomer. And just 2 days ago, the imperial astronomer, which was already heavily guarded, had secretly increased the number of elite soldiers by another 600 or so. There were 2 generals who wore armor instead of the robes of military officials. One was close to 60 years old and the other was in the prime of his life. Both of them stood at the entrance of the imperial astronomer with their hands on their swords, acting as two door gods. The two men, who were one generation apart, looked very similar, like a pair of father and son. The old general was Li Shogua, the shooting commandant stationed in the northern part of the capital. During the Spring and Autumn War, his military achievements were mediocre, and he was only a deputy commandant. Therefore, 5 years ago, Li Shogua was promoted step by step to the position of shooting commandant, one of the 4 major commandants in the capital. He was only a joke in the capital's officialdom and the capital's military, and was rudely given the nickname, Commandant of Peace. This meant that if Li Shogua was in a time of chaos, with his mediocre ability, he would not even be able to become a commandant, let alone the most powerful commandant in Liang. These years, he had relied on his skill of flattery to become an official. He did not know how to fight, but he knew how to be an official. Especially when he was lucky enough to climb up the branch of Ma Lulang, the general of the expedition to the north. However, with Li Shogua's eldest son, Li Chang'an, who stood out in the Jingji army last year, this kind of talk gradually dissipated. Li Chang'an was only 30 years old. After the current emperor ascended the throne, he was quickly promoted to be a corps general among the permanent military generals in Liang. He was an extremely sturdy 4th-ranked general. His significance was equivalent to that of a civil official taking on the position of governor in a place outside of the 6 ministries. If he didn't make a big mistake in his position, he would definitely be waiting for a promotion. Speaking of which, it was strange. Although Li Chang'an, who had never been to the Liao border and had no military achievements, was not considered unknown before this, compared to the younger Yin Chang'an and Han Xingyan, he was clearly not good enough. However, this person became one of the first generals promoted by the emperor, making the officials in the capital feel like they were looking at flowers in a fog. Good things came in pairs. Li Chang'an's younger brother, Li Changliang, only followed Wang Yuanran and a few other hedonistic sons to Beiliang's Yuzhou for sightseeing. After returning to the capital, he quickly received a transfer order from the Ministry of War and became a captain of the Liaodong Duoyen elite cavalry. The 3 of them, one was Captain Shuang, one was a corps general, and one was Captain Duoyen. This made the Li family, whose ancestral graves were emitting smoke, suddenly have a saying in the court, Little Gu family. Although the father and son worked together to guard the gate of the imperial astronomer, Li Shogua and Li Chang'an never looked sideways. Compared to Li Chang'an's calmness, while Li Shogua's face was calm, his heart was beating like a drum. Not long ago, the eldest son, Li Chang'an, suddenly received an imperial edict to enter the palace to meet the emperor. He was quickly transferred out of the inner city and led 800 imperial guards to guard the imperial astronomer between the royal city and the palace. He himself also quickly entered the capital from the northern part of the capital. The transfer order to enter the capital did not come from the Ministry of War document. It came from the Li family's benefactor, General of the North, Hufu. General Ma Lulang was an old man nearing 80 years old and had been bedridden for many years. In the Liang army, in terms of seniority, only Zhao Cheng, Yang Shenxing, and Yan Zhenshuan could compare. In addition, Yang Shenxing and Yan Zhenshuan had both been demoted and killed. Even though Ma Lulang had not participated in ceremonies and court meetings for nearly a decade, the previous emperor and the current emperor had never lacked in rewards for the Ma family. Everyone knew that as long as Ma Lulang did not die, even if he was only hanging on by half a breath, as long as the old man did not completely die, then the Ma family, whose location was even better than the Duke of Yan's manor of the Marquis of Huaiyang, would still be the Ma family that coughed a few times in the capital and caused a huge commotion in the court. Li Shogua originally could not figure out why the imperial astronomer, which had nothing to do with officialdom, needed to muster such a large force. 600 imperial guardsmen plus his own 800 elite soldiers in the northern Jingji army, a total of 1,400 people. Who were they guarding against? Who was worthy of such a grand treatment? Chapter 16-17. It was only when he heard that before the Prince of Northern Liang entered the capital, he had brought along 800 northwestern cavalry soldiers and made the western army led by Wuxia officer Qi Changgong become his bodyguards that Li Shogua finally understood. Because Li Shogua was a general with real power, and because he had saved the life of the old general's only son during the war in Dongyue, he had long since become an honored guest of the general of the north, Ma Lulang. In the early years, he had vaguely heard a secret rumor in the Ma family. It seemed that there had been a strange and treacherous conspiracy in Great Peace City. The spearhead was aimed at Lame Su, who had not yet been made a king. Nan Huayu of the imperial astronomer, who had now died of illness, had played a dishonorable role. The only son of Ma Lulang, the Anong general Ma Zhongxian, who now held the power of the Jingji East Army, spoke of this matter in a drunken stupor. His expression was one of pride and self-satisfaction. Li Shogua knew that one shooting commandant was far from enough to touch the inside story of that conspiracy. Maybe only when his eldest son, Li Chang'an, became number one in the 4 campaigns and 4 towns would he have hope of understanding the shocking truth hidden under layers of curtains and dust. Of the 4 campaigns, Ma Lulang had struggled at death's door for many years, but his family's favor had not decreased. Zhao Jia ignored the disputes for many years and rose up in the face of danger, sharing power with the South Campaign commander Lu Xingxiang. Yang Shenxing had long left the capital for Ji province. He seemed free, but he was actually far away from the core of the dynasty, which affected the speed of Yang Huchen's rise. If Yang Huchen had not lost an arm on the Guangling Road battlefield, the price would have been too great and the court would have felt bad about it. Otherwise, not to mention the deputy general of Ji province, he would probably have fallen into silence. Then, when Yang Shenxing died of old age, the Yang family would have quickly become a second or third-class family in Liang. Yan Jinshuan, a famous cavalry commander with splendid military exploits, a true military general of the Zhao dynasty, actually died in battle at the border of Guangling Road. In the end, he was only brought to his coffin with an exceptional posthumous title, that was all. For great generals of the dynasty who were of the same rank and second only to great general Gu Jiantang had 4 completely different endings. After Li Shogua figured out the hidden ins and outs of the matter, he was both horrified and chilled. Ma Lulang, the head of the old Ministry of War in Liang, was the first person to show strong enmity towards Su Shao. Zhao Kuang was the general who firmly supported the Battle of the Western Fortress. However, as the spring and autumn war neared its end, Zhao Kuang, who had once fought side by side with Su Shao, began to lean towards Gu Jiantang. After that, he did not follow the Su family's iron cavalry into Shu. Instead, he chose to assist Gu Jiantang in attacking southern Tang. During the reward event in the capital. During the grand banquet of the meritorious officials, Zhao Jia and Su Shao became enemies. Before the previous emperor ascended the throne, Zhao Jia had been one of the previous emperor's lackeys in his struggle with the old prince of Jinggan, Zhao Heng. Yang Shenxing had a shallow relationship with Su Shao, and there was almost no personal relationship between them. Yan Jinshuan, when Su Shao left the capital, this general who greatly respected Su Shao personally saw Su Shao off. Li Shogua did not know how the highly respected old general felt when he led the army out for the last time in his life. The eldest son, Li Chang'an, who had always been quiet and cautious, did not agree to his father's request for a banquet after he was promoted to a general without any warning. Instead, the father and son had a secret conversation that no one else should know about. In that conversation, it was Li Chang'an, the son, who taught Li Shogua how to be an official. They did not talk about the superficial ways of welcoming and sending people off, but about how to understand the emperor's heart. It was only then that Li Shogua found out that his son had long been the emperor's confidant. Unlike the other generals who were secretly appointed by the late emperor to be the one supporting the emperor, Li Chang'an relied on his own luck to gain the trust of the 4th prince at that time. Li Chang'an bluntly told his father that His Majesty had hinted to him that he would be promoted to the next general of Anbei in 3 years at the cost of his father's retirement. In 3 years, whether he would go to Liaodong, Guangling, or the northwest, it would depend on his own ability whether he could become a border official with iron armor. At this moment, Li Shogua, who had mixed feelings, sighed softly. The Li family, from him to his 2 sons, had always been seeking riches from danger. When Li Shogua saw the carriage in the distance, he began to breathe heavily. Even if he died here today, as long as his son Li Chang'an lived. The Li family had the hope of becoming the second Su family, and not the little Gu family. Inside the imperial astronomer, behind the door with the plaque Excellent Realm of Insight, there was a crop altar covered with 5-colored soil from the Guangling path. The east was green, the south was red, the west was white, the north was black, and the middle was yellow. A middle-aged Confucian scholar squatted in front of the red soil in the south. Beside him stood a young man whose lips were tightly pursed. He wore the uniform of the imperial astronomer. His position was similar to the Taoist master of Longhu Mountain, and he had become the second Taoist minister in the current dynasty. As the leader of the Taoists in the north, it was not appropriate for him to squat with the Confucian scholar. However, if the tall immortal Wu stood up straight, it would be too disrespectful to the young imperial astronomer nicknamed Little Bookcase, so he could only bend down as much as possible. Wu Lingsu, who was called the Great Peace City Immortal Wu Shizhen along with his son Wu Shizhen, had the appearance of an immortal. In these 2 years, he could be said to have called the wind and the rain. Even Jin San Lang had to treat him and his son as important guests. However, at this time, the bent immortal Wu was trembling with fear. His back was soaked with sweat. It was unknown whether it was the sweat from the sun or the cold sweat from the fear. An old man in white approached. Wu Lingsu, who had the highest position on the stage, was the first to speak. He said respectfully to the old man with great Xiantong, "Imperial astronomer, this humble Taoist pays his respects." The imperial astronomer, who was in charge of calculating the stars and promulgating the calendar for the imperial court, was an important figure in the Zhao family of Liang. Other than the imperial astronomer and the imperial astronomer, the imperial astronomer was not the imperial astronomer of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Not to mention the lower-ranking imperial astronomer like Jianghu, it was the immortal teachers who did not wear official robes and only wore white. Moreover, this person had the title of imperial astronomer. The white-clothed Qi cultivator in front of him looked like a middle-aged man when Wu Lingsu had seen him several times. However, the next time Wu Lingsu saw him, he looked like this. The imperial astronomer's deputy imperial astronomer, who had broken through the bottleneck at the Maui Post station yesterday, looked worried. He said softly to the man who had not stood up, "Mr. Xia." The Confucian stretched out his palm and placed it flat on the soil. He smiled and said, "I know that Duke Yenqing has left the capital. Don't worry, I will personally preside over the operation of the formation." The Qi cultivator grandmaster was about to say something when Xia Guining stood up and clapped his hands. He turned around and said, "Other than the 1,600 people of the Li family, there will be another 300 palace guards who are already on their way." The Qi refinement grandmaster still looked like he wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Xia Guining glanced at the towering building in the capital and said with a faint smile, "Why? Do you really want me to say that His Highness the King of Shu is here so that you can be at ease?" The imperial astronomer heaved a sigh of relief. He then said bitterly, "Mr. Xia, I gave up the heavenly Tao and did not walk. I am no different from a pure martial artist like Xianyuan Pan. Naturally, I would not know that His Highness King of Shu has arrived." Xia Guining's tone was playful. Qi Xianxia first went to Mount Wudong to meet Hong Xixiang and cultivated. He also saw Li Yufu. He walked a few hundred miles along the Guangling River and arrived at Taiyan City. Yu Groom unintentionally pointed out the mysteries of Li Yufu. Li Yufu gave up on proving Tao and ascending, and even gave up on being a land immortal. Jin Xian, what do you think? Jin Xian had not been called by his name for decades. He was a little dazed. Xia Guining looked up at the cloudless sky and said softly, "Ancestor Lu once said, don't ask if there are gods in the world and how many people have ascended since ancient times. He also said that if you subdue a fire dragon, you will subdue a tiger, and you will become a land immortal." Wu Lingsu thought about it carefully. He only felt that it was indeed mysterious. However, it was useless to a half-baked Taoist like him. But from the corner of his eye, he saw that the deputy imperial astronomer was deep in thought and his expression was changing. Xia Guining walked slowly to the Tongtian platform. The king of Shu, whom he helped wholeheartedly, did something unexpected. One was to go to the north to enter the capital, and the other was to enter the imperial astronomer. Xia Guining did not stop and said to Jin Xian, "If you still have the thought of ascending, remember to kill Li Yufu as soon as possible." The juvenile imperial astronomer, who was very close to the emperor and empress, followed Xia Guining. He had no awareness of the upcoming war and laughed. Mr. Xia, there is a chess player named Fan Jianghu. He is better at chess than you. Xia Guining smiled. What's so great about being better than me? When it comes to chess, I can't even beat Li Yishan, who is known to be a bad chess player. However, I know my strengths and weaknesses and never ask for humiliation. Nalan Yusi is different. I remember that year, I watched him lose to Li Yishan 16 times in a row. He still did not admit defeat. I have seen a lot of people who care about winning and losing. He is the only one who cares so much. Oh, no, your grandpa Imperial Astronomer is also one of them. He still thinks that you can beat Huang Longsher until he dies, right? The teenager sighed and said helplessly, yes. In fact, I don't like chess very much. Grandpa Imperial Astronomer wants me to learn how to play chess. I can't help it. Xia Guining bent his finger and knocked on the teenager's head. How many people want to die but can't get it? You don't like it. The teenager grinned and suddenly lowered his voice. Mr. Xia, are you poaching from His Majesty the Emperor? Chapter 16:18. Xia Guining was not surprised at all. He continued to climb the stairs calmly. Don't tell him. The youth blinked. Why? Xia Guining ascended step by step and chuckled. If you agree, I'll tell you why your grandpa Jian Zheng will always lose to Huang Longsher and why he can't be the chess armor in the spring and autumn 13 armors. The youth thought for a while. Deal. I'll go help Jin Sinan. The youth turned and ran down the stairs. Xia Guining came behind Chen Jibao, who was standing near the Tiandao of the Tongtian platform, and asked, Are you still unwilling to take this step? Chen Jibao did not answer. Xia Guining said slowly, Tantai Pingjing herself did not know that her Daoist heart was damaged. Jin Sinan was even worse. He neglected the fundamentals and focused on the trifles. He had been accumulating for decades and was the most promising seed of the Tiandao. However, he pulled up the seedling to help it grow and ruined himself. Old Jian Zheng and Nan Huayu persuaded the late emperor to not adopt the new calendar written by Li Dangxin. As a result, the old Tiandao gradually collapsed. You and I were the ones who benefited the most from it. Even if Chao Chongqing did not die and did not let you have the fate energy, you could still become the only 3 sages after ancestor Lu in 1,000 years. Gao Shulu would also be overshadowed. I'm afraid that other than Wang Xianji, Li Chungang, who was at his peak 60 years ago, Su Fengnian, who just defeated Wang Xianji, and Chao Chongqing, who was determined to die, would not be your match. Chen Jibao said, There's also Dong Tai, who really held a sword, Su Yanbing's dying shot, and you, who was willing to give up being the emperor of the human world for 1,000 years, Xia Guining. Xia Guining shook his head. You know that I won't fight for such a title. The price is too high. Xia Guining suddenly said, You're unwilling to take this step because you don't want to bask in Su Fengnian's glory? Chen Jibao remained silent. Xia Guining smiled and shook his head. If that's the case, why did you come to Beijing? Is it fun to watch Su Fengnian strut around? Chen Jibao did not say a word. Xia Guining gently sighed. You contradict yourself. After a long time, Chen Jibao, who was looking into the distance, suddenly said, We seem to have missed a person. Xia Guining said nonchalantly, No matter how much effort I put in, a disobedient chess piece is dead. Outside the Imperial Astronomical Observatory, Archery Commandant Li Shogua acted as if he was facing a great enemy. The 2 carriages on the left almost sped over, and then suddenly stopped not far from the main gate. 2. Other than the king of Biyao, who else would dare to get involved in this mess? Could it be that Su had reinforcements? Li Shogua gestured Li Chang'an not to leave the gate and walked towards the 2 carriages alone. As a result, the nervous captain was stunned. 2 elegantly dressed women walked out of the 2 carriages. However, after seeing one of them clearly, Li Shogua immediately knelt on one knee and cupped his fist. Li Shogua greets the Empress Dowager. After Zhao Zhuan ascended the throne, Empress Dowager Zhao Ji nodded slightly. Get up and guard the gate. No one is allowed to enter. Li Shogua quickly got up and returned to the main gate of the Imperial Astronomical Observatory. At this time, Li Shogua, who was sweating profusely, saw his eldest son Li Chang'an with a relieved expression. He thought to himself, "Good boy, if not for the Empress Dowager's arrival, I would have thought that you were not afraid at all." The two women, who were of similar age but had different auras, stood 5 or 6 steps apart and looked at the other end of the street side by side. Empress Dowager Zhao Ji said with a hoarse voice, "Today, even if you die, you must stop him. Otherwise, he will die." Jiao Restaurant's proprietress smiled. Back then, he lied to his mother. This time, is it still a lie? Zhao Ji suddenly turned to look at this woman. She bit her lip so hard that it was slightly bloodshot. This woman, who was once married to the scholar named Sun Ping, might have gone mad. She actually laughed heartily. "I am a woman. Now, I am a widow who runs a small business. Back then, even though I knew that my man wanted to die, I endured it and did not interfere. On the way here, I indeed wanted to stop that child at all costs. When I got down from the car just now, I don't know why, but even if I wanted to watch that child die, I felt that I should not stop him. Women, you, Zhao Ji, are not the only one to fall out with others. Actually, anyone can do it." Zhao Ji narrowed her eyes. "You want Su Xiao and Wu Su's son to die so badly. Moreover, it is the eldest son, Su Fengnian?" The proprietress's lips twitched. "Zhao Ji, my memory is better than yours. I remember that Su Xiao said a long time ago that there is no one in the world who deserves to live or can't die. There is no such logic. It is not easy for a man to walk in this world. It is not shameful to think of living as long as possible. But sometimes, it is even more necessary to die." Zhao Ji's face was as dark as water. Unknowingly, a young woman stood behind each of the two women. Princess Sui Zhu, Zhao Fengya. Qin Yu. Between the two of them, one was haggard and the other was in high spirits. When the proprietress of Jiao saw the black dot at the end of her vision, she turned to Qin Yu and smiled. "Back then, you should have seized the opportunity to make a move. It is a pity that you missed some men." Qin Yu seemed to have recalled some past events. She raised her finger and pointed at her chest. She smiled and shook her head. "Aunt Hong, when I first met that guy, he kept looking at me here. It is really difficult for me to make a move on such a man." The proprietress held back her laughter and scolded the brat. She said hatefully, "If the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. You are indeed the same as your father." Qin Yu grunted twice. She lowered her gaze slightly and looked at the towering scenery. Her eyes were clearly full of smiles, but her tone was somewhat aggrieved. "My place can't be fake, right?" The carriage approached slowly. Even though he knew that the imperial astronomer would not be able to cause a ruckus with the presence of the Empress Dowager Zhao Ji, Li Chang'an's heartstrings were taut in an instant. Li Shogua was sweating profusely and his vision was almost blurred. A young man lifted the curtain and got out of the carriage. He did not deliberately avoid the Empress Dowager Zhao Ji, Princess Zhao Fengya, Sun Ping's wife, and Qin Yu, but he did not deliberately approach them either. When Zhao Ji saw this, she clenched her fists and said in a low voice, "Su Fengnian." Su Fengnian, who was facing the imperial astronomer, slowed down his footsteps. Zhao Ji stared at the handsome face that resembled the face of a certain woman from back then. This young man was still young. He was different from the high-spirited person he had seen before. He was also different from the white-haired person he had seen before. This time, the young man's surname Su was reserved and calm. Zhao Ji said angrily, "Su Fengnian, don't forget that you are now the king of Biyao. Beimang will still send its army south at any time." He did not stop walking. If he walked another dozen steps, they would see his back. Zhao Ji said in a heavier tone, "Yuan Benshi, Yang Taisui, Han Xingxian, Teacher Lu, they're all dead. Other than Yuan Benshi, the other 3 have all died by your hands. They're all dead." Zhao Ji found that the young man showed no signs of stopping. A deeply hidden panic appeared in her eyes. She forced herself to calm down and said, Su Fengnian, even if you don't consider your own life, you have to consider the millions of Beiliang's people. If you die in Great Peace City today, do you not know that the 300,000 cavalry will come to the capital? Do you not know that the Beimang army will take the opportunity to step into the Central Plains? The young man finally stopped walking. Zhao Ji could just see the side of his face that was clearly defined. Perhaps it was because of the rough sandstorms of the northwest and the tempering of the battlefield. There was no gentleness on the young man's face, only determination. Seeing this person stop, Zhao Ji did not let down her guard. She continued, the emperor tolerated you entering the capital without permission this time. You, Su Fengnian, should understand. Su Fengnian did not turn his head. He looked at the solemn imperial astronomer. Many people, including you and Zhao Duan, do not understand why after the white clothes case in the capital, my father left the capital and returned to the Su family's camp with hundreds of thousands of armored soldiers. He still did not lead his army into Great Peace City. Even when my father died, he did not tell me why. Su Fengnian paused. But after I wandered outside Beiliang like a dog for 3 years, I understood why. Su Shao did not dare and was not willing to drag his fellow soldiers who had fought in the north and south for half their lives to die with him. But if Su Shao was not just a level 2 master of martial arts, but a top expert of the martial arts, he would have charged into the palace alone and killed all of you. Do you know what I wanted to do the most after returning to Beiliang? It was not to inherit the throne one day and control the 300,000 border soldiers of Beiliang. It was to practice martial arts and become the best in the world. At that time, I was not afraid of death, but I was afraid that I would be like Su Shao for the rest of my life and only be a master. I wanted to practice martial arts even in my dreams. No one knew that on the border of Liangmang, there was a young man who did not want to sit under the awning and finally reached the first level of Vajra realm. How happy was that? Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes. The reason I said this is because you are women. But don't forget, Zhao Ji, in the white clothes case, my mother was also a woman. Su Fengnian started to walk forward. Densely packed iron armor swarmed out of the gate of the imperial astronomer. At the end of the streets on both sides, there were countless elite cavalry soldiers rushing over. Zhao Ji, Jiao Restaurant's lady boss, Qin Yu, and Zhao Fengya heard the young man's last sentence. What Su Shao wanted to do but could not do back then, Su Fengnian will do today. Su Yanbing no longer sat in the carriage. He slowly installed the spearhead on the spear. Inside the carriage, there was a large black and gold embroidered robe that he had taken off from his body. The young man who walked toward the imperial astronomer. An old cold knife hung from his waist. He was dressed in white. Chapter 1619. I have something to do tonight, so I only have one chapter today. After the morning court was dismissed, the emperor did not hold a small court meeting to discuss politics as usual. He only had the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tonglu, call for the scattered left cavalry attendant, Chen Wang. At that time, Chen Wang was about to walk down the white jade steps with the provincial head official, Huan Wen, but he could only stand where he was. Because the left scattered cavalry was an important official in the central government, his position in the so-called Golden Imperial Hall was quite close to the front. Therefore, every time the court was dismissed, by the time Chen Wang stepped out of the hall, the civil and military officials outside the hall had already dispersed like the tide. However, because there were too many unfamiliar faces in this morning court, including Duke Yan Gao Shi and Marquis Huayang Song Downing, a large group of officials and nobles were all present, making the originally spacious hall seem crowded. Therefore, when Chen Wang stopped, there were still people passing by this well-deserved, auspicious talisman's #1 official. Even Song Downing, who gave the impression that the capital's officialdom did not care about worldly affairs, took the initiative to exchange a few pleasantries. A few old officials who once worked together with the old Grand Preceptor of West Shu and the previous left servant of Liang, Sun Shiji, were even more intimate with him as if he were their own son-in-law. If it were not for head eunuch Song Tonglu's gaze, these old officials, who needed to be carefully supported in their daily lives at home, seemed to be able to stand here and chat with Chen Wang for an hour. Chen Wang and Song Tonglu, who was wearing a red python robe, stood together. The inside and outside of the hall gradually cleared out. Chen Wang did not rely on his friendship with the current emperor to ask the head eunuch of Liang's head of eunuchs for the reason. He kept his mouth shut the entire time. It was Song Tonglu who, after a long silence, took the initiative to say softly, "I'll have to trouble Chen Wang to wait for a moment." Chen Wang grunted. In the face of Chen Wang's lukewarm response, the eunuch in the python robe, who was feared by all the civil and military officials, did not feel the slightest bit of dissatisfaction. Ever since Song Tonglu took over the ceremony directorate from Cat Man Han Xingxian, he had been caught up in the transition between the old and the new in Liang. He rarely had any respect for an official anymore. In Song Tonglu's mind, Chen Xiaobao's ranking was only behind Qi Yanglong, Gu Jiantang, and Huan Wen. He was even ahead of Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochun. Chen Wang, who was born a poor scholar, was really too similar to an old man. Whether it was personal integrity or official career, they were exactly the same. It was so much so that it was hard for people to be jealous of them. Chen Wang was so distracted that he only came back to his senses when someone patted him on the shoulder. He turned his head and smiled helplessly before bowing slightly. The young emperor did not wear his dragon robe. Instead, he had changed into a set of casual clothes that did not fit the etiquette. He stood shoulder to shoulder with Chen Wang at the top of the stairs. Song Tonglu, on the other hand, had already bent his waist and retreated. His tiny footsteps were silent as he made way for this pair of auspicious monarch and minister who were destined to leave their names in history. Chen Wang saw a few eunuchs working together to bring over a long ladder. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "What is your Majesty doing?" The emperor smiled and said, "First, accompany me and wait for someone." When Chen Wang saw the ladder carefully placed on the eaves of the throne room, Chen Xiaobao, who had some understanding, didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He wanted to say something but stopped. The young emperor pointed to two people in the distance for Chen Wang. One was wearing a vermilion python robe. It was clear that he was an important eunuch whose status was not much lower than Song Tonglu's. The other was wearing the clothes of an ordinary Confucian scholar. As they got closer, Chen Wang could finally clearly see the appearance of the two people. The eunuch from the ceremony directorate was a very senior eunuch. At this moment, he was walking slightly ahead of the young man beside him. He was slightly bent at the waist, with one palm extended forward and the other hand holding up his sleeve. It was as if he was leading the way for the other person. The latter's eyes were closed, and his steps were not big. When the eunuch took the lead to walk up the stairs, Chen Wang vaguely heard the old eunuch say, "Mr. Lu, be careful of your feet. We are about to climb the stairs." The emperor turned his head and smiled. "Can you guess who it is?" Chen Wang nodded and said, "Mr. Lu, Lu Xuan of Qingzhou." The king of Jing and presented the 2 strategies and 13 strategies in the last years of Yonghui. Everyone in the capital knows that it came from Mr. Lu behind the scenes. The emperor suddenly felt somewhat depressed. While there was still some distance between the two sides, he lowered his voice and said, "Lu Xuan's go skills are very strong. I think that even if the two of us worked together, we would still be chopped up like vegetables. He could easily take care of us." Chen Wang couldn't help but laugh. He quietly joked, "Why don't we get the 10th chess saint, Fan Jianghu? If it doesn't work, doesn't your Majesty still have the imperial astronomer and eunuch Jing to support you? If the 4 of us go together, are you afraid that we can't beat one Lu Su? If it doesn't work, there's still Wu Zongxian, who claims to only lose to Fan Jianghu. If it still doesn't work, we can take turns and deliberately test Lu Su to see how long he can last. We don't have to be afraid that he won't make a move." The young emperor gently elbowed Chen Wang's waist and scolded jokingly, "It's one thing to bully Mr. Lu's poor eyesight and find Fan Jianghu to be our military advisor. You even want to take turns? Can't we be more shameless?" Chen Wang said shamelessly, "This humble subject's face isn't worth much anyway." The emperor raised his elbow and was about to strike again. Chen Wang quickly moved a few steps away. The eunuch from the ceremony directorate led Lu Su closer to the emperor and Lord Qin. When they were about 10 steps away, the emperor quickly walked down the steps and took Lu Su's hand. He smiled and said, "Mr. Lu, I'm sorry to have invited you into the palace in such a hurry." Lu Su didn't reveal the slightest bit of fear and trepidation. He calmly said, "It's a pity that Lu Su is blind and can't see the spectacular view of the palace." When the eunuch who was holding the brush saw this scene, his eyelids twitched. After the young emperor and Lu Su, who was still a commoner, reached the top of the steps, Chen Wang smiled and greeted Lu Su, Chen Wang of Wuxia Province. "It's my honor to meet Mr. Lu." Lu Su bowed and said, "Lu Su greets Lord Chen." Chen Wang accepted it calmly. That bow was the first and last time Lu Su bowed to an official of Liyang since he entered the capital until the end of his life. Many years later, Lu Su quietly died of illness. Grand Secretary Chen Wang stood in the deserted morning hall where only a white-haired old woman was and returned the bow today. The emperor said to Song Tonglu and the eunuch in charge of writing in a deep voice, "I want to climb the steps with these two gentlemen. One of you will dismiss everyone nearby and the other will guard here. Remember, in the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, I want to see no one in the palace from the roof." The old eunuch in charge of writing quickly left. He naturally didn't dare to fight with Song Tonglu for the position of guarding the steps. Under the emperor's irrefutable order, Chen Wang had to climb the steps first. Lu Su followed closely behind. The young emperor and Song Tonglu held the steps for the two of them on the left and right. Song Tonglu didn't raise his head, but he caught a glimpse of the young emperor from the corner of his eye. An emperor with an excellent reputation in the court was holding the steps for a young official and a poor scholar in white. There were two pairs of boots above the emperor's head. Song Tonglu's eyes suddenly reddened. When the three of them reached the roof of the lofty hall, the eunuch with the seal of the ceremony directorate was completely out of sight. Song Tonglu didn't dare to let go of the steps, but he raised his sleeve slightly to wipe his eyes. Chen Wang helped Lu Su to sit near the roof ridge, leaving the middle seat for the young emperor. After Zhao Zhuan sat down, he smiled and asked, "Is this your first time seeing the scenery of the capital?" "Huh, me too." Me. Intentionally or unintentionally, he stopped using the word I. Chapter 1620. Zhao Zhuan put his hands on his knees and sat upright. He gazed out at the imperial streets and slowly said, "When I was still the fourth prince, I heard that there were two tallest buildings in the world in the capital. Even the heavenly platform of the imperial astronomer in Great Peace City couldn't compare to them. One was the missing moon tower on the snowy plains of Mount Hui, and the other was the tide listening pavilion in Biyao. I've been to the snowy plains. It is very tall. Xianyuan Qingfeng is an incredible woman. She won't let me in. At the time, Chen Wang, you were by my side. We were both given the cold shoulder. Therefore, I feel much better about exposing her shortcomings. No matter what happens in the world, it's much easier to have two people to shoulder it." Chen Wang smiled. Zhao Zhuan stretched and cracked his neck. "It's a pity I haven't been to the tide listening pavilion. Actually, I really want to go there one day to climb the building. After all, my wife is from Biyao. No matter who she marries, as long as she marries well, she will want to return home. This is the same logic as us men who want riches and honor but don't return home. Although my wife doesn't say it, I can't help but think about it in my heart. But right now, the court and Biyao are on bad terms. Not to mention that my father-in-law was scolded badly in private letters by his peers in Biyao. Even my brother-in-law, who is good friends with Su Fengnian, didn't get to see Su Fengnian when he went to Biyao Palace on Mount Qingliang. This time, Su Fengnian also came to the capital to avoid arousing suspicion. My brother-in-law didn't go to the Demoyai courier station either. Actually, I wouldn't mind at all if I saw him. Why would I mind? I feel guilty towards the Yan family." Zhao Zhuan put his elbows on his legs and rested his chin on his hands. He gazed at the imperial road that seemed to extend all the way to the South Sea. The way of a subject is to follow the rules. The way of a son is to be filial. But in my opinion, whether it's a subject or a son, you can't escape the bottom line of being a human being. Remember the past and remember the kindness. Great Peace City, especially the so-called Golden Imperial Palace under our but, what does it have the most? Most of them were officials. There are many officials who are very capable. They are able to get benefits from both sides and do everything flawlessly. But as for their ability to conduct themselves, I don't think so. But most of the time, even though we know that the people inside and outside the hall have selfish motives, generally speaking, as long as it doesn't harm the country, I and the former emperor, who sit on the dragon throne, will turn a blind eye to it. After all, when the water is too clear, there will be no fish. Sometimes, we even have to personally add fuel to the fire. But this doesn't mean that we aren't sick of it. Day after day, year after year, listening to the cheers and praises, it's really a very boring time. Zhao Zhuan suddenly couldn't help but laugh out loud. He said helplessly, I'm not afraid that you two will laugh at me, but there have been several times when I've been sleep-talking, and I've always said the words rise up. Because of this, I've been teased by my wife for no reason. Blind Lu Xuan raised his head. The sun was not high in the sky, and a cool breeze was caressing his face. Chen Wang suddenly said, facing a mountain of memorials every day is very tiring. Zhao Zhuan sighed with emotion. As long as you want to be a good emperor, you can't rest for even a day. This is the most tiring thing. When I was young, I often complained to my mother that I couldn't see my father. It was very strange. Must an emperor only see his son a few times a year? At that time, I swore to my mother that when I grew up, I didn't want to be an emperor. I wanted to play with my children all day long and watch them grow up bit by bit. Then, they would get married. Chen Wang sighed. Zhao Zhuan smiled brightly and pointed to the south. I know that there is a Jianghu outside of the imperial court. Especially in the past 100 years, it has been very exciting. Previously, there was Li Chungang from Green Mountain, and there were also the 13 grades of spring and autumn. Later, Wang Xianji was known as the invincible martial artist in the martial emperor city. After Huang Longsher scattered the remaining fate energy of the 8 kingdoms of spring and autumn into Jianghu, more and more top-notch masters sprung up. A few years ago, I would occasionally think that if I wasn't a prince, but a young man from a Jianghu sect, would I be able to get into the martial arts review? Even if I wasn't a first-pin master, it wouldn't be difficult to be a master who could command the wind and clouds in a county, right? Not to mention other things, just based on my extraordinary ability to read memorials every day without frowning, I should be able to make a name for myself, right? Lu Su smiled and said, ordinary masters want to make a name for themselves in the Jianghu world. It's not as easy as climbing up the ranks in the imperial court. Zhao Zhuan nodded and said, therefore, if I were only Zhao Zhuan, then I would actually be very envious of Su Fengnian. The young emperor paused for a long time. I also admire Su Fengnian. Lu Su said gently, in a small place called Yongzi Alley in Qingzhou, I once gambled chess with the king of Biyao and won a lot of money from him. Therefore, I roughly know that it's very difficult to catch the eye of the king of Biyao. Out of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court, there are only a handful who can do it. But at the same time, it's also very simple. Perhaps the peddlers like him and are willing to treat him as a friend. Chen Wang smiled and said, if it wasn't for the money the king of Biyao used to buy poetry and literature, allowing me to gather the money to go to the capital for the imperial examinations, I would most likely be a private teacher in Biyao. Zhao Zhuan said calmly, therefore, if it wasn't for Su Fengnian, the 3 of us wouldn't be sitting here today. Maybe it would take me 5 years, 10 years, or even 20 or 30 years to be able to sit here and chat with someone else. I want to thank Su Fengnian, and I also want to thank all of you. Lu Su said calmly, if it was someone else who became the emperor, Lu Su and Sir Chen wouldn't be able to sit here for the rest of our lives. Therefore, there's no need to thank the 2 of us. The meaning behind the blind scholar's words was self-evident. Zhao Zhuan wasn't angry and said softly, the Su family's 800 cavalry rode from Biyao straight to the capital. I had people carry an imperial edict and respectfully escort him into the capital. I had the minister of the Ministry of Rights stand guard at the city gate because this is the treatment the 300,000 Biyao cavalry who guard the gate of the Central Plains deserve. Su Fengnian massacred everyone at the Maui post station, attracting countless masters to join forces. He fought great battles one after another and could be said to be the masterpiece of Jianghu. I didn't pay attention to it because this is the treatment Su Fengnian deserves as the martial arts grandmaster of Liang. Before coming here, I heard that he went to the Ministry of Rights Yamen wearing a vassal king's robe. Not only did he beat up left assistant minister Jean Lanting, he even pulled out Jean Sanlang's beard. I still wasn't angry because he is one of the most powerful vassals in Liang. I, Zhao Zhuan, can take a step back for him. Even if he took care of the old minister, Sima Puhua, I can still endure. To the extent that the previous emperor could tolerate Su Shao, I can tolerate Su Fengnian to the extent that I can tolerate him. It doesn't matter even if it's more. Because I am sitting on the dragon throne, he is guarding the country for me. Zhao Zhuan clenched his fists and placed them on his knees. He narrowed his eyes and said, but he wants to go to the imperial astronomer, to the place where the Zhao family of Liang rose. He wants to destroy the painstaking efforts of countless people. I can't stand it. I'd rather he come to the imperial palace and point at my, Zhao Zhuan's, nose and curse when there is no one around. Zhao Zhuan stood up and turned to look at the imperial astronomer. He said in a low voice, Liang's annual transport of grain to the capital is more than 8 million shi. Excluding the amount that cannot be ignored in the capital, I originally planned to give 1 million shi to Biyao every year. Under this premise, for every 150,000 Baimang killed by Biyao or every 50,000 frontier soldiers killed in battle, I will give him another 500,000 shi each. Since Gu Jiantang of Liao can't kill people, as long as you Biyao can kill people who are still in Liang's territory, then I am willing to give you provisions for the soldiers. Following this, Zhao Zhuan said expressionlessly, Imperial astronomer, Li Shogua and Li Chang, and father and son, 1,400 armored soldiers, 100 experts from the Ministry of Justice, 300 imperial guards, plus the 1,200 cavalry that has already left for the imperial astronomer, a total of 3,000 people. According to what was said before, the annual 1 million shi, plus the contributions from killing the enemy and the compensation for those who died in battle, Biyao now has more than 3 million shi of grain. When he leaves the capital, he will send it along the Guangling River to Biyao. However, today at the imperial astronomer, for every person he kills from great and city, I will leave behind 1,000 shi of grain for the imperial court. The grain of the Central Plains was used to buy Baimang's head and also to buy Baoyang's life. Lu Su was indifferent. Chen Wang wanted to speak but stopped. Was the young man rushing to the imperial astronomer Su Zhao's son or Wu Su's son? They looked the same, but were very different. Was it the king of Biyao, the leader of 300,000 cavalry, or was it the Jianghu grandmaster Su Fengnian who had mastered martial arts? They looked the same, but were very different. The only young emperor standing said calmly, therefore, if you, Su Fengnian, have the ability to kill 3,000 people, then do it. Chapter 1621. The 1,400 armored soldiers of the Li family surged to the gate of the imperial astronomer like a flood. They formed a tight formation like a barricade. In reality, there was only one person in front of the armor. The 1,400 elite soldiers who had specially changed into heavy armor, other than the two generals, Li Shogua and Li Chang'an, were all inside the gate of the imperial astronomer. Not a single one stepped out. Wearing this kind of large armor that weighed 50 caddies was equivalent to abandoning all flexibility and mobility. Originally, it should have appeared in a special battlefield where the foot could stop the cavalry, relying on the innate weight of a single armor and the momentum condensed by a dense formation to resist the impact of the cavalry's charge. However, if an army was only equipped with heavy armor, large shields, and long spears and crossbows, no matter how steady they would not be able to chase after the cavalry even if they succeeded in stopping the charge of the cavalry. They would only be able to defend and would not be able to expand the battle results. However, on today's strange battlefield, no one found the equipment of 1,400 people that defied common sense to be ridiculous. In fact, most of the soldiers wished that they could wear another set of armor that was suffocating after being worn for a long time. The 100 copper fish bag masters that the Ministry of Justice had carefully selected from the rivers and lakes of Liang over the years were divided into two groups. They stood on the two wings of the infantry formation. Their positions were very particular. They were slightly scattered and tried to squeeze into the Imperial Astronomer's field. At the same time, they could coordinate with each other to prevent the enemy from circling around and entering the gate. At the ends of the wide street outside the Imperial Astronomer, the infantry and cavalry arrived. The 300 Imperial Guards with golden embroidered scabbards were the first to leave the cavalry. They walked as fast as they could, sticking close to the base of the wall and heading straight for the Imperial Astronomer. They blocked in front of the 1,400 infantry. The 1,200 cavalry that had been urgently transferred from the northern Jingji army had a majestic aura. They were far more in line with the title of a Tiger Wolf army than the western Jingji armies who Qi officer Qi Changgong's western wall camp. They were in no hurry to charge. They stopped their horses at the two ends of the street and watched covetously. When they did not show up earlier, the sound of the horses' iron hooves hitting the street was like thunder. This already showed that part of the cavalry was terrifying enough to tear apart the enemy formation. This mysterious cavalry that had never appeared before the eyes of the capital was an elite cavalry that the general of the north, Ma Lulang, had spent most of his life and a huge amount of money to build. The location and number of soldiers were not recorded in the Ministry of War's files. The Ministry of Revenue of Liang did not have to bear the expenses of this cavalry. For the past 20 years, it had always been directly transferred from the treasury of the Kingdom of Zhao to support the shocking expenses of maintaining the operation of the cavalry. Historically, only the old Minister of War, Gu Jiantang, had the qualifications to know the inside story. When Chen Zhibao and Lu Baijie temporarily took over the Ministry of War, they were already unable to know too many details. They could only roughly know the growth of the cavalry, from the initial 300 to 500, 800, before Chen Zhibao stepped down as Minister of War and became a vassal. When Lu Baijie was demoted to Guangling Road as Jidushi, they could only speculate that this cavalry had shown signs of a sudden increase in numbers from other sources. This was because after the ascension of the emperor, especially after Beiliang's victory over Beimang, the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Revenue began to secretly deploy troops that were not legal. The Ministry of War selected soldiers, horses and armor, while the Ministry of Revenue had to pay a huge sum of money even if they had to tighten their belts. They didn't even dare to complain that they were poor. Moreover, the accounts had to be clean, so that even the doctors of the Ministry of Revenue who were not involved in the specific affairs of the Ministry of Revenue would not be able to see any clues. However, even Lu Baijie, who had once been the Minister of War, did not know that this cavalry had an extremely special significance to the three Zhao emperors of Liang other than its unstoppable and shocking combat ability. In the past 25 years, the cavalry had only secretly entered the capital 3 times. The first time was when Emperor Gaozu, who had established Liang's legitimate status, personally issued a secret order. Yang Taisui and Lu Haoshe personally led the cavalry into the city. The second time was when Emperor Gaozu won the title of Meritorious Minister. The last time was when the previous Emperor Zhao Dun successfully wore the dragon robe that night. Led by half-inch tongue-bearing Ben Shi, they marched straight into Great Peace City and surrounded the mansion of Zhao Heng, who was still a prince at that time. Therefore, this was basically an army supporting the dragon of the Liang dynasty. The proprietress of Jiao restaurant looked around and for some reason, her smile was somewhat bleak. She muttered, "Sun Ping, is this the military might of Liang that you wanted to create back then?" She shook her head and collected her thoughts. She turned to Zhao Ji and mocked, "What, you're still not leaving? Are you staying here to use your status as the Empress Dowager to tie down Su Fengnian so that he won't dare to go on a killing spree?" Zhao Ji's expression was complicated. It was bleak, bitter, hateful, and fearful. In the end, he sighed and said self-deprecatingly, "A long time ago, you were only Wu Su's friend, even though we knew each other earlier. Now, you only treat Wu Su's son as a junior. As for my 2 sons, be it Zhao Zhuan or Zhao Wu, you're not even willing to look at them." The proprietress seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world. She said sternly, "Fight, you've been fighting your whole life. Even today, you're still like this, wanting to fight for everything. Su Shao overshadowed Zhao Dun, you're resentful. Wu Su's name shook the capital, you're not convinced. Now, Su Fengnian and Zhao Zhuan, these two youngsters, are upright, relying on their family's resources and abilities to wrestle with each other. What are you getting involved for? What can you do? Chapter 1622. Zhao Zi's face was devoid of any rich expression. There was a rare sadness and decadence. He turned to look at the imperial astronomer and said softly, Wu Su and Su Shao are dead. My man is dead too. My son has become the emperor. What do I have to fight for? But you don't know what the imperial astronomer means to the Zhao family. The Saber armor Qi Lianhua has killed all the Qi cultivators from the imperial astronomer. It has already affected the fate of the Zhao family in Liang. If Su Fengnian insists on killing people today, he will destroy the formation built by the previous Taoist masters of Mount Longhu. As a result, the items sent to the capital by the previous saint of the Zhang family, Yansheng Gong, will be destroyed. Do you know what kind of catastrophe this will be? You definitely don't know why the Empress of Beimang's million-strong army didn't even break through Beiliang's pass. More than 300,000 people died, but she didn't immediately strip King of the Southern Courtyard Dong Zhuo of his position as the commander-in-chief. She was waiting for Beiliang to see the hope of another victory after the great victory. She wanted Su Fengnian to enter the capital to ask for the transport of grain and fodder. During this time, she came to the imperial astronomer to settle the old score and destroy Liang's foundation. Therefore, the people who are watching the imperial astronomer now are that old woman and Beimang's Taiping commandant, West Chu's Chao Changqing, Nanjiang's Yan King Zhaobing, and Liao's Gu Jiantang. Of course, at this very moment, Mr. Xia and the king of Shu are standing in the imperial astronomer. Zhao Ji sighed and said, is the imperial astronomer really just about the life and death of Su Fengnian and 3,000 soldiers? The Beiliang cavalry, West Chu's rebel army, Nanjiang's army, and Liao's border army are all involved. If we're not careful, Beimang's million-strong army will ruthlessly trample on the territory of the Central Plains. Even if they're eventually beaten back and driven back to the desert and grassland, how many people will die in Liang? The lady boss deliberately showed a frightened and terrified expression. She covered her chest and said, you scared me to death. The corners of Qin Yu's mouth curved slightly. The lady boss suddenly walked toward Zhao Ji. She raised her hand and was about to slap him. Zhao Ji remained motionless, his eyes cold. The lady boss smiled and retracted her hand. Forget it, I'm afraid of dirtying my hands. Although this old lady's Jiao dojo is a small business, at least the things I make are clean. As for you big shots meddling in the affairs of the country, I don't give a damn about how you worry about the country and its people. In any case, I only know one thing. With Wu Su's son here, as long as Su Fengnian is alive, no matter if he is in Great Peace City or in Beiliang, no matter if he dies in the imperial astronomer today or on the battlefield in the future, in the end, I feel satisfied. Because it makes me feel that not only is my man a fool who dares to risk universal condemnation, but also the father and son of the Su family, Su Shao, and Su Fengnian. The landlady walked towards the carriage, and Qin Yu followed closely behind. After the landlady sat down in the carriage, she looked at Qin Yu who was bending down to enter. She teased, do you regret it now? Qin Yu's bright eyes were smiling as she looked at the landlady. She did not speak. The landlady said in bewilderment, if he was just a wretched lecher in the past and you did not like him, why are you still not moved? Qin Yu hesitated, her expression strange. She finally said, in the past, he only wanted to take me back to Beiliang and give me to his younger brother, Su Longxiang, to be his wife. Aunt Hong, do you think I would have agreed? My teacher, Huang Longshi, was depressed for many days when he learned of this news. The landlady resisted for a long time and then laughed. She wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. This boy is even more of a bastard than the young Su Shao. Zhao Ji also returned to the carriage. He saw his daughter with a sad expression, Princess Sui Zhu Zhao Fengya. Zhao Fengya lowered her head and said, fourth brother promised me not to marry Qin Jibao. Zhao Ji said angrily, I do not agree. A horse galloped with all his might. He rushed past the armored cavalry at the end of the street and headed straight for Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian was only 20 steps away from the gate of the imperial astronomer. He sighed when he saw the young man who had fallen off his horse. Yan Qiji, the Huang men of the Hanlin Academy and the younger brother of the current empress, stood in front of Su Fengnian with a face full of sweat and tears. He choked with sobs and said, "Brother Nian, don't go any further. His Majesty said that Biyao can lift the ban on the transport of 3 million dan. However, for every one of the 3,000 armored soldiers who dies today, 1,000 dan will be deducted." Su Fengnian said softly, "Go back and tell Marshal Addict Kong that we are still brothers." Yan Qiji suddenly grabbed Su Fengnian's sleeve and said with tears streaming down his face, "Brother Nian, don't go. I beg you." Su Fengnian said softly, "Don't worry, I won't die. No matter how many people I kill, Li Yang will not dare to take a single dan less from the transport of 3 million dan." Then Su Fengnian shook his sleeve and broke free from Yan Qiji's grip. He scolded jokingly, "Get out of here. If you stay here, I will be distracted." Yan Qiji was conflicted. He gritted his teeth and did not say anything else. He suddenly turned around and mounted his horse again. Without turning his head, the young man raised his hand and gave him a thumbs up. Su Fengnian looked at the imperial astronomer. He held the old cold blade hanging from the left side of his waist. His left hand pressed lightly on the hilt. A pale-faced leader with a copper fish bag took 5 or 6 steps out of the formation and shouted, "Halt! Immediately retreat 50 steps from the gate of the imperial astronomer." The next moment, this Ministry of Justice official flew high into the air like a kite with a broken string. He fell heavily into the infantry formation behind the gate. Unknowingly, Su Fengnian was standing where he was standing just now. "Biyao, you can fight or die, but you cannot retreat." Even facing 1,000,000 troops of Beimang was like this, let alone 3,000 soldiers of the Zhao family. Chapter 1623. The 300 imperial guards held the hilts of their swords at the same time. Even though the masters of the Ministry of Justice were repelled by the young king and were ready to break into the imperial astronomer, the 300 Zhao kingdom's elites still didn't immediately draw their swords to kill the enemy. Of course, this didn't mean that the royal guards were all pretty but useless. It also didn't mean that the royal guards had a good temper. If it had been anyone else standing at the door, the 300 royal guards with the secret edict would have already rushed up and killed them. However, for some reason, the young man in front of them didn't wear the king's robe. After all, he was the son of General Su Shao, who had 300,000 Northwest Iron Cavalry. He was also a martial arts grandmaster who was as famous as Chao Chongqing and Dong Tai. In terms of Jianghu, he was probably more famous than the other 2 Earth immortals. Whoever drew their swords first would die first. The reason was that simple. The consecrator of the Ministry of Justice was sent flying. The deputy commander of the Imperial Guards could only brace himself and take his place. This tall and sturdy peerless master of the Imperial Guards had an imperial saber with the name, Eternal Hui Tian, hanging from his waist. During the reign of the late emperor, it took the palace master 5 years to forge 18 swords. The first 3 swords were kept in the palace guards. Only when the late emperor wore the golden dragon armor and participated in the hunt, he would wear one of them. Until the end of the Yonghui dynasty, in addition to the 3 palace guards, the Yonghui Tian 16, 17, and 18 were given 3 swords. According to the rules, the position of the palace guards commander was not hereditary, but the golden swords were hereditary. In other words, only those who sat in these 3 positions were qualified to wear the 3 swords. Gu Jiantang of the Great Pillar State, Chen Zhibao of Shu, Lu Baijia of the Tangxi Sword Ferry, and Wu Zhongshuan, who had just arrived at the capital to attend the imperial court. Each of the 4 ministers of the Ministry of War of the Liang dynasty was bestowed with a sword and kept it for generations. Among the 8 generals of the 4 campaigns and 4 towns, other than Wu Zhongshuan, only the general of the northern campaign, Ma Lulang, received this honor. However, no one knew the exact number of the 5 insignia sabers. After the current emperor ascended to the throne, he ordered nearly 500 new imperial swords to be replicated according to the Eternal Hui Heaven sword. He personally named them the auspicious talisman day swords, or day swords for short. The scabbard was made of wood with a golden peach leather sheath. The guard was an oval-shaped hollow plate made of iron and gold. There were 3 moving jade dragons inside, which were vivid and lifelike. The deputy commander of the royal guards took a deep breath. His tone was no longer as stiff as the unlucky guy from the Ministry of Justice. He said in a low voice, "King of Biyao, please don't make things difficult for us." Su Fengnian, who was standing with his hand on the blade, did not make a sound. He did not take out the old cold blade that had been forged very early on. Instead, he gently tapped the hilt of the blade with his finger. It was like the sound of Baoyang's drum. Being able to become the deputy commander of the royal guards in Liang, he naturally would not be a coward. The burly man smiled. He had a bit of the spirit of a man who was willing to die for the emperor. He probably knew that he was going to die. He did not have the old-fashioned attitude of a servant beside the emperor in the palace. He looked at the northwest vassal in front of him and laughed heartily, Yang Dongping, a wild warrior from the old Dongyue countryside. 12 years ago, I entered the capital as a royal guard's guard. I have been away from Jianghu for 12 years. This is the last battle of my life. To be able to fight with the king of Biyao, my life is not in vain. After saying his last words, Yang Dongping took out the Eternal Hui Heaven No. 17 Imperial Sword, which he did not know who would be given to after his death. He shouted, "Meet the enemy." 300 auspicious talisman day swords were neatly unsheathed. Yang Dongping took the lead and rushed forward with the sword. He roared, "Follow me to retreat from the enemy." In an instant, 20 royal guards, including Yang Dongping, rushed forward one after another. In addition to maintaining the thickness of the formation outside the front gate of the Imperial Observatory, 100 royal guards did not move. The rest of the royal guards rushed to the left and right sides of the battlefield where the king of Biyao and Yang Dongping were fighting. Obviously, they not only wanted to block the path of the young vassal, but also to block the path of retreat. More than 200 royal guards were extremely fast. For a moment, outside the gate of the Imperial Observatory, they were like a group of gorgeous butterflies fluttering in the air. The soldiers of the Li family who were inside the gate were dazzled and felt a chill down their spines. They asked themselves, how can an ordinary master survive such a fierce encirclement? Every step that Yang Dongping took caused the street to tremble. He didn't dare to jump up and slash down. When facing a martial grandmaster like the king of Northern Liang, who was much weaker than him, there were too many openings. He was destined to be killed in one move. Even though Yang Dongping was a first-stage Vajra realm martial artist, he only chose the most conservative move. He used his saber as a sword and stabbed the tip of his saber towards the king of Northern Liang's chest. Furthermore, he didn't use his full strength in this attack. He left 30% to 40% of his chi in case he couldn't defeat the king of Northern Liang. Although Yang Dongping had been away from the Jianghu of the Central Plains for more than 10 years and was not well known, he did not dare to slack off for a single day in the palace where countless martial arts manuals were stored. The path of martial arts was like sailing against the current. If you did not advance, you would fall behind. Yang Dongping, who had outstanding talent and constitution, had endured loneliness for more than 10 years. He did not care about the false reputation of being a Xian finger expert. Instead, he trained his Vajra realm cultivation to be extremely solid. The move before him was a combination of several supreme arts that had not been passed down. He had also received guidance from the former head of the ceremony directorate, Han Xingxian. This move of his had almost reached the realm of returning to simplicity. Yang Dongping did not dare to underestimate the new grandmasters in the world. However, he soon realized that he had not faced a top grandmaster for many years. Once he encountered a figure like the king of Biyao, a slight mistake could be fatal. Yang Dongping's original intention was to avoid the king of Biyao when he saw that the situation was not good. Otherwise, he would retreat on the spot. With the palace guards behind him filling in the positions and helping to delay the battle, he would still have a chance to survive. At that time, he could continue to fight. Unfortunately, Yang Dongping did not expect that he would die because he did not overestimate himself but seriously underestimated his opponent. The young man in white did not try to stop him. He allowed the Eternal Radiance No. 17 Imperial Sword, which could cut through iron like mud, to stab his chest. At that moment of choice, life and death were on the line. Yang Dongping, who thought that he had an opportunity, suddenly increased the qi between his 5 fingers. He stopped accumulating power and the 3 jade dragons in the Imperial Sword's guard immediately let out sonorous dragon cries. When the tip of the Imperial Sword was about to touch the linen cloth on the young man's chest, it would be able to penetrate his body. Suddenly, a huge force was transmitted from the body of the Imperial Sword. The Imperial Sword in his hand was like hitting a mountain, like an egg hitting a stone. Yang Dongping had decisively given up this precious Eternal Radiance Imperial Sword. However, just as he let go, the king of Biyao had already stretched out his palm. Yang Dongping's whole body seemed to have been hit violently by a battering ram. His body was still slightly moving forward, but his whole chest instantly caved in and a large part of his back protruded at the same time. Yang Dongping, who was in the first-grade Vajra realm and the deputy commander of the palace guards, died on the spot. Yang Dongping's body flew out and hit a guard who was waiting for an opportunity to pounce on the young lord. The unparalleled momentum caused the guard to have no time to dodge, and a large amount of blood splattered wantonly in his chest. There was a guard behind him who tried to reach out and stop his seriously injured colleague. With a crack, his arm exploded. There was no chance for him to regret. The 2 people who were retreating without any signs of weakening slammed into him. Then, the 3 corpses flew out together and slid out on the ground. The corpses slowly stopped in front of 100 palace guards who were as motionless as mountains. On the ground, a scarlet blood flowed. The dead were already dead, and the living were a ghastly sight. After Yang Dongping was killed by a palm, the Eternal Radiance Heaven Blade, which was supposed to be passed to the next deputy commander of the palace guards after the war, flew out of his hand. Su Fengnian casually waved it. The Imperial Sword that was thrown high out of its sheath paused for a moment, and then began to fly like a flying sword controlled by a sword immortal. Chapter 1624. The saber first swept across the neck of a palace guard, and in the next moment, it pierced through the shoulder of his colleague beside him. It entered the left shoulder and came out the right shoulder. A nearby guard who had jumped high with his saber was cut in half by the saber. It formed a large arc around Su Fengnian. After all, this group of palace guards was one of the few experts in the palace. In the arc of Jianghu 17, there was no lack of people who used their sabers to save their lives or intercept. However, without exception, as long as they used their sabers, the temporarily ownerless Jianghu 17 was unscathed. However, the day sabers in the hands of the other guards shattered on the spot. Without seeing Su Fengnian move, Jianghu 17 began to draw a second arc with a larger range. At the same time, in the first big circle around Su Fengnian, the sabers of all the palace guards who died in battle before they could use their sabers also began to leave the ground and fly into the air, joining the arc. In the second arc, which was even farther away from Su Fengnian's body, there was an ear-piercing sound of the day saber exploding and breaking, and corpses kept falling to the ground. The more than 160 palace guards who were still alive were forced to stand outside the arc. It seemed that they were surrounding the king of Biyao, who had not really used his saber yet. In fact, they could not even catch the corner of the young king's clothes. When Su Fengnian began to move forward, the arc that was visible but traceable suddenly rippled and changed. Occasionally, it would jump out of the arc and kill a certain guard before returning to the arc. More than 20 guards who were caught off guard were killed immediately. After someone shouted, "Break the array together," the palace guards outside the circle began to slash at the arc with no regard for their lives. Ordinary people would not be able to detect a breath. For an ordinary martial artist who had reached a high level in martial arts, a single breath was like a raindrop falling on the roof, disappearing as soon as it touched the ground. However, a martial arts grandmaster's breath was as long as a river. Ever since he personally created the division of martial artists into the first grade and the fourth realm, there was a saying that his body could travel 800 miles in an instant. When experts of similar strength fought against each other, it was mostly a battle of qi. Whoever had a longer breath would often be in an invincible position, and whoever had a shorter breath would be able to seize the fleeting opportunity faster, thus resulting in life and death for the other party. No matter what, the rest of the imperial guards found that they could not let the young king continue to finish everything in one go, comfortably. Su Fengnian continued forward, ignoring the imperial guards who were trying their best to break the formation. He turned his head and looked at Su Yanbing, who was holding the instant spear. The latter smiled and nodded. Su Yanbing's accompanying this time was not to help kill people, and was not even to help Su Fengnian block the armored cavalry at the two ends of the street. These people would all be left to Su Fengnian, who had reached a new level in the Maui post station, to deal with himself. But before Su Fengnian entered the imperial astronomer, he would hold back 2 people and 2 formations. Su Fengnian was today in Great Peace City. Just like when Wang Xianji was standing in Martial Emperor City. This kind of state of mind was related to the level of martial cultivation, but at the same time, it was not very related. But whether or not one had this kind of state of mind, it would have an effect on one's cultivation. Previously, Su Fengnian had truly managed to fight 1 against 2 people at the last moment of Maui. This had already explained everything. At the time, Chao Chongqing, Luo Yang, Wu Jian, Xianyuan Qingfeng and the others had done it intentionally. Dong Tai, Chen Jibao, Yu Groom, Chai Qingshan and the others had done it unintentionally. On the empty street, Su Yanbing lightly inhaled, the shaft of the spear in his hand trembling. This man who had always been seriously neglected in the Liang dynasty and the Jianghu of the Central Plains, a middle-aged martial artist who had never been heard of, who had never left Beiliang's territory, and who did not have many illustrious battle records, raised his head to look at the heavenly connecting platform of the imperial astronomer. Qin Jibao, Xia Guining, who will come first? Or together? On the heavenly connecting platform, Xia Guining said helplessly, of the 2 of us, the one who can fight, you are not willing to act, the one who can run, I can't run right now. What should I do? My head hurts. Qin Jibao said indifferently, there are 2 big arrays in the imperial astronomer, the one on Dragon Tiger Mountain can be used to imprison Su Yanbing. Xia Guining sighed, although there are more than 60 imperial jade seals in the spring and autumn period, and the influence of Duke Yanqing's presence is not big, but without the big array on Dragon Tiger Mountain to reduce Su Fengnian's strength, the effect will be very different. The most important thing is that you are not willing to act. Qin Jibao interrupted the words of the ambitious scholar. You should know that Su Fengnian came here to do something that I would have done in the future. I'm just standing here, and that's already giving you a lot of face. If you want to take the opportunity to destroy Beiliang's fate, then do it with your own ability. Xia Guining said self-mockingly, I know. Our cooperation is like asking a tiger for its skin. I, Xia Guining, know it in my heart. At this time, Jin Sinan, who had been the leader of the Qi cultivators in the north for 20 years, suddenly ran into the Tongtian platform, looking anxious. Xia Guining frowned, his fingers quickly pinched in his sleeves, and said to himself, it is not strange that Duke Yanqing suddenly left the capital, but other than that, what other big changes can there be? Jin Sinan's face was pale, and he said sadly, Mr. Xia, I just went to the imperial treasury and found that Duke Yanqing had taken away the central seal that symbolizes the fate of the Confucian school. Xia Guining was stunned at first, then he laughed, his sleeves shook, looked to the south, and said in high spirits, Duke Yanqing, do you really think that by doing such a rebellious thing, you can stop me, Xia Guining? You are just trying to be clever and make a fool of yourself. You're just a bunch of stubborn scholars. On the post road, in a simple carriage from the north to the south, a middle-aged Confucian scholar and a little attendant were sitting in the carriage. The little attendant looked at his teacher who was fidgety for the first time, and could not think of anything in the world that could make his teacher feel uneasy. Finally, the little attendant could not help but ask curiously, Mister, what's wrong? Before the teacher could give an answer, the little attendant thought that he had found the answer, and he grinned, could it be that you are not acclimatized to the capital and have a stomachache? The middle-aged Confucian scholar had a small wooden box with simple carvings on his knees. After hearing the little attendant's teasing, he remained calm. The little attendant was worried, and he asked with a bitter face, "Mister, are you worried about the world's affairs? Can I share your worries?" Soon, the little attendant sighed heavily and said, "Of course not, I don't even have scholarly honors now." The middle-aged Confucian scholar smiled and said, "Everyone is responsible for the rise and fall of the world. Whether or not one has the ability is secondary, whether or not one has morals in one's heart, it comes before one's ability." The little attendant's face still did not look better. "I have read so many sages with you, of course I know these principles." The Confucian scholar smiled and said, "This time you have to accompany me to the capital. In the end, you want to slack off on your homework and study for me." The little attendant said, "Oh," and began to read aloud the 10 family precepts that the teacher had summed up with his life's efforts. The teacher's family precepts were the family precepts of all the scholars in the world. Inside and outside the carriage, the sound of reading was loud. The middle-aged Confucian scholar began to close his eyes and concentrate. A scholar listened to the sound of reading. When you see a virtuous person, you should follow him. When you see a virtuous person, you should reflect on yourself. Do not do to others what you do not want to be done to yourself. I reflect on myself 3 times a day. When the little attendant read the last sentence of the 10 precepts, a scholar must be resolute. The burden is heavy, and the road is long. The middle-aged Confucian scholar followed and said, "A scholar must be resolute. The burden is heavy, and the road is long." Then he suddenly opened his eyes and patted the little attendant's shoulder. His eyes were firm, and he slowly said, "Because the burden is heavy and the road is long, we scholars should remember one thing more: a scholar must be resolute." The little attendant did not know the inside story, but he nodded hard. It was the middle-aged Confucian scholar of the current Duke Yensheng. He smiled and opened the box. It was empty. The Duke Yensheng said softly, "Su Fengnian, with you, Biyao, fighting to the death in front, the Central Plains will be resolute behind." Chapter 1625. The top Qi cultivator in the north, Jin Xian, stood beside Xia Guining and Chen Jibao. He looked down at the scene outside the gate of the imperial astronomer. Looking at the young vassal king who was still suppressing his aura despite being trapped in the battle, he suddenly felt generous. Why bother? Since you have already killed your way to the imperial astronomer, why don't you give it your all? Jin Xian, as the head of the imperial astronomer and the head of the imperial astronomer, knew a lot of inside information that even the officials in the capital did not know. For example, the existence of the 2 big formations was the cornerstone of the battle against top martial artists like Wang Xianji and Chao Chongqing. Beimang's west capital once had a huge vat that hid a flood dragon, which could be used to search for all kinds of strange phenomena in the human world. The imperial astronomer's methods were not bad, or even better. Jin Xian also knew that this time, in order to target the young man surnamed Su, he could be said to be unscrupulous. In Mr. Xia's plan, the 300 palace guards were not chosen purely because of the combat power of these guards, but because they were closely related to the fate of the Zhao family in Liyang. In particular, he persuaded the current emperor to allow the 1,200 heavy cavalry trained by Ma Lulang to rush into the capital in hopes of wearing down Su Fengnian's own fate. As the top Qi diviner, Jin Xian knew about fate and fate. It seemed illusory, but in short, it was the will of the people. It was the power of heaven and earth. On the contrary, it was no longer the fate of heaven. It was the fate that heroes were not free, and everything came to an end. Therefore, Mr. Xia was really cruel and merciless. Not only did he ignore the life and death of the 3,000 soldiers, but he also wanted to destroy the fate that Biyao had painstakingly gathered by Su Fengnian. At that time, Qi Jiajia's one sword of going Liang did not make Su Fengnian use Beiliang's fate. The young vassal king risked his life to prevent the one sword of 1,000 miles from entering Yuzhou. This time, Mr. Xia was forcing Su Fengnian to make a difficult choice. Would he let his emotions affect his decision, barge into the imperial astronomer, and resist the 2 big formations regardless of the consequences? Or would he leave some suspense for Beimang, which was in the middle of Beiliang's struggle for power in the Central Plains? Now it seemed that compared to the time when Qi Jiajia, 1 man and 1 sword, died one after another, Su Fengnian's state of mind had changed. he no longer had his hands and feet tied, nor did he have any misgivings. Although he was on the opposing side of the young vassal king, when Jin Xian and saw the scene at the door, he couldn't help but feel sincere admiration. With this young man leading the new Jianghu of Liang, Li Yufu, Qi Xianxia, and Xianyuan Qingfeng, all of them were truly impressive. Outside the Imperial Observatory, Dong Tai had just shown his magnificent skill of killing 1,000 people and 1,000 swords in an instant in Tai and City yesterday. Today, Su Fengnian was using what he had learned. A young vassal king who had forcefully borrowed the day sword appeared in front of each of the 100 palace guards standing outside the door. Almost all of the palace guards were repelled by one move, and they all crashed into the outer wall. The entire thick wall rumbled and was on the verge of collapsing. If there were some valiant guards who didn't want to retreat and tried to take back their swords to continue blocking the road, they were quickly stabbed by a sword and nailed into the wall along with their swords. Of the 300 palace guards that Yang Dongping had brought, less than 100 were still alive. Yang Dongping was the first to die in battle. The two carriages had just turned the corner at the end of the street and had just brushed shoulders with the charging cavalry. On one of the carriages, Chen Yu lifted the curtain and saw through the gap that at the very back of the cavalry, there were many tall and large cavalry who were donning armor and getting on their horses with the help of the supporting troops. Other than that, there were also hundreds of idle warhorses that no one had ridden. Chen Yu said in surprise, "I thought that this troop had entered Tai and City as an armored cavalry." The proprietress of the Jiao restaurant couldn't help but laugh. "Silly girl, this is a heavy cavalry that has only appeared a few times in the wars of the spring and autumn period. When they travel, they definitely won't wear armor. Before they face the enemy, the warhorses they ride will definitely be supporting horses. Otherwise, if both the men and horses wear armor, the cavalry and the warhorses won't be able to take it after a long time. Let alone being able to destroy everything on the battlefield and play a crucial role in deciding the battle, they probably would have collapsed from exhaustion before they could even charge. Wearing armor before the battle is a rule of heavy cavalry. Only then will they have enough strength to tear apart the enemy's most dense and important formation. But even so, they cherish the strength of the warhorses. On the battlefield, it's already very impressive to be able to carry out 2 long-distance charges while maintaining an orderly formation. As for using 1,000-man heavy cavalry in a roundabout way, that's just a novel and can't be taken seriously. Chen Yu reluctantly pulled back her gaze and put down the curtain. She sighed emotionally. Aunt Hong, so that's how it is. In the past, I thought that heavy cavalry meant that they could wear armor and run for thousands of kilometers. The lady boss's eyes were absent-minded. She said softly, "Only when you go to Biyao and see them kill with your own eyes will you know how valiant a true heavy cavalry is." Actually, I only heard it casually from my man back then. But at that time, Su Xiao used the strength of alcohol to pat his chest and say some heroic words that reached the clouds. He said that one day in this life, he would lead over 100,000 elite cavalry and beat 1,000,000 Beimang barbarians until they were cowards who didn't even dare to step out of their homes. Back then, my man Sun Ping and Su Xiao, one a poor scholar who had no money and the other a boor who had to look at the Ministry of War's face, could actually drink together and brag without thinking. It was already strange enough. Wu Su and I, 2 women, actually felt quite helpless every time we saw them putting on that cocky appearance of a hero in the world at the table. Xie Guining suddenly joked, "Are you really not going to fight with Su Yanbing? Or are you saying that you'll wait until you've taken that step and half a step respectively before you have a life and death battle like Su Fengnian and Wang Xianji? But let me say this first. This kind of opportunity might not come. It's the same for both you and him." Qin Jibao stretched out his hand. A beam of light suddenly descended from the sky and landed on the heaven-reaching platform. Chapter 1626. Qin Jibao held the plum wine and pulled it out gently. His figure flashed and disappeared. Even though Jin Xian and had ascended to the great celestial state, he still couldn't help but take a step back when the long spear landed on the ground. At that moment, the Qi cultivator grandmaster understood a principle. Jin Xian and state was like an ant in the eyes of Su Fengnian, Qin Jibao, and Su Yanbing. Xie Guining turned and threw a sharp look at Jin Xian. The latter calmed down and nodded. He went downstairs in his white robe. In a hidden attic of the imperial astronomer, the northern prime minister of the Liang dynasty, Wu Lingsu, who was wearing a purple gold robe, followed Jin Xian into the building. The two straightened their clothes and took an incense stick from the hands of two old Taoists who had been guarding the building for many years. They walked to a table carved from red sandalwood. On the table, there was an ancient incense burner. There was an incense stick as thick as a child's arm in the burner all year round. The incense stick burned continuously. Before Jin Xian came, not only did he put on the deputy uniform of the imperial astronomer, he also borrowed the badge of the head of the imperial astronomer and hung it on his waist. Wu Lingsu, on the other hand, went to great lengths to bring the golden edict that the court had issued to him. The edict was stamped with the vermilion seal of the Emperor's 3 seals and the Emperor's 3 seals. It was the Emperor's seal that was specially used to worship the gods. Jin Xian and Wu Lingsu put the incense sticks in their hands on the left and right sides of the burner respectfully. The two spoke at the same time. Jin Xian folded his hands and looked straight ahead. He said in a low voice, enforcing justice on behalf of heaven. Wu Lingsu looked down and bowed. To suppress the 4 barbarians. The wall behind the burner was shrouded in layers of smoke. One could vaguely see solemn portraits that were as tall as real people hanging on the wall. As Jin Xian and Wu Lingsu finished speaking, the thick smoke gradually dissipated. The portraits that didn't reveal themselves started to show their true faces. They didn't reveal their true faces. The portraits on the wall were of the ascended Taoist masters of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. Jin Xian's expression was complicated. It was just like what Xie Guining had said to him before. Don't ask if there are gods in the world, how many people have ascended since ancient times. In that case, the real people depicted in the portraits were the real people who had ascended. They were either riding dragons, cranes, or phoenixes. People only knew that the celestial masters of Longhu Mountain and the Zhao family of Liang had the same surname. However, the history between them could be traced back to the founding emperor of Liang. Because of Wudong Mountain, Zhao Huangchao, who was born a noble, had no choice but to conceal his identity in Mount Longhu and cultivate in seclusion. He raised an evil dragon in Earth Lung Mountain to restrain the northwest black tortoise. The 3 incense sticks in the incense burner that were originally dimly lit suddenly blossomed into 3 brilliant flames. Especially the incense stick in the middle, it burned out at a speed visible to the naked eye. When the incense burned out, the paintings on the wall seemed to move without any wind. The sound of books being flipped could be heard in the building. The 2 brand new portraits hanging on the left and right were the first to shake, and they were also the first to show signs of abnormalities. In the air 3 inches outside of the portraits, mysterious ripples appeared. 2 Daoist masters in yellow and purple Daoist robes broke out of the mirror. Their figures were illusory as they walked out of the portraits and the mirror. They floated to the ground and walked out of the building. One by one, the sage-like Daoist masters landed on the ground and floated out of the door. Some of them were carrying ancient swords, some were holding purple gold books, and some were holding horsetail whisks. Among the last 3, one of them was riding an auspicious white deer and singing generously. After the white deer immortal, 2 immortals appeared side by side. One of them had a delicate face, a lotus crown on his head, and a long-sleeved crane cloak. Unlike the previous immortals, whether it was his aura or his eyes, there was a trace of heaven and earth pity me, I pity all living things. The other immortal who came with him was extremely young. He looked about 30 years old, and there was a murderous aura between his brows. After he landed, he raised his hand and held a talisman sword, Yule, that had been enshrined in the building for hundreds of years in his hand. He weighed it in his hand and the corner of his mouth curled up. Jin Sinan maintained a respectful posture with his hands folded and looked straight ahead. Wu Lingsu, who was recognized by everyone in the Liyang imperial court as a lucky person, was trembling in fear and sweating profusely. One by one, the immortals appeared at the imperial observatory in the mortal realm. Most of them passed through the Li family's infantry formation and arrived at the entrance of the imperial observatory. Apart from two of the armored soldiers, whose eyes suddenly became unfocused, and then their bodies suddenly emitted a purple gold light, turning their eyes golden and imposing, the rest of the immortals lined up at the entrance. They stood in the exact same position as the portraits in the building. The immortals who had replaced the 300 imperial guards all had different expressions on their faces. An immortal on the right whose feet were shrouded in purple mist turned to look at the newly ascended sect master of Mount Longhu, Zhao Danxia, and asked with a smile, "Is this the one?" With each word, the people around the gate of the Imperial Observatory seemed to hear the sound of nature. Zhao Danxia nodded slightly. It is this person who abandoned the true body of the Xuanwu great emperor in this world and cut off his own path to immortality. The immortal surrounded by purple clouds frowned slightly and angrily stared at the young man in mourning dress. He rebuked, "Treacherous." On the far left, the old perfected master Zhao Shi, who had ascended with Zhao Danxia, was also talking to a grandmaster beside him. When the latter heard that it was this person who had blocked Zhao Huangchao's path to immortality, he was furious. Flying swords formed a formation around him and he softly shouted, "How dare you!" When this immortal said these two words, the bells and drums of all the Daoist temples in the capital suddenly rang. Changming Great Peace City. An immortal stood in the middle. Golden armor could be vaguely seen under his loose robe. The immortal glanced at the charging cavalry on the left side of the street and smiled slightly. A ball of golden light exploded and flew toward one of the cavalry generals. The cavalry was instantly possessed by an immortal. His entire body shone brightly and shone brightly. The golden-armored immortal urged his horse forward. The immortals were in front. Su Fengnian looked at these high and mighty immortals expressionlessly. He did not say anything and only raised the cold blade in his hand. That was all. Chapter 1627. In novels about immortals and supernatural beings, the description of those who achieved the Tao after a rough journey of cultivation would usually be given the title of immortal class, which meant that they had a place in the heavens. Actually, in the end, it was the same as those scholars in the world who had obtained scholarly honors in the imperial examinations and obtained a position in the imperial court or the throne room. The immortals in front of the gate of the imperial astronomer really opened the eyes of the soldiers of the Li family. Living under the feet of the emperor, they could see all kinds of strange people and things. For example, Jiang and I flew through the 18 gates with a sword. Many people in the capital were lucky enough to see it with their own eyes. However, Jiang Ni's style was at most like a banished immortal. It was definitely the first time they saw a real immortal. Moreover, dozens of immortals in Taoist robes appeared in front of them in one breath. It was too much for the eyes to take in. All the soldiers of the Li family didn't dare to breathe loudly. They all widened their eyes and stared hard at those tall and low figures. Enemies were bound to meet. The young immortal in the middle was holding a talisman sword, Yulei. It was a Taoist treasure that was as famous as Wudang's sword maniac Wang Xiaoping's Shinshu. Probably because it was too precious, it was hidden deep in the imperial astronomer in the capital. After a long time, people only knew about Shinshu and not Yulei. On the other hand, Wudang Mountain didn't have the habit of keeping treasures. Even a treasure like Lu Zu's relic was casually hung on the corner of the eaves. When Qi Xianxia went to Wudang Mountain to make trouble, he just took a few glances at the relic. At that time, the young chief Hong Shixiang also lent it to him. Qi Xianxia felt that it was too childish and didn't accept it. Although Wudang Mountain and Dragon Tiger Mountain were both Taoist ancestral courts, the path of cultivation was poles apart. The latter climbed to the heavens step by step and only wanted to ascend. The former chief in the past 100 years, from Huang Manshan and Wang Zhonglo to Hong Shixiang and Li Yufu, all of them diligently traveled the world. There was no such thing as yellow and purple nobles and feather-clothed ministers. At this time, the sword-carrying immortal was very similar to Zhao Ningxian, the current leader of the Dragon Tiger Mountain, in terms of appearance and demeanor. However, compared with the latter who was like a piece of jade, this young Taoist with strong immortal qi was more aggressive. He was like a well-carved national seal with countless golden talismans flashing around his body. In fact, the ancestor that Zhao Ningxian had invited to the Spring God Lake many years ago was this person. But at that time, the immortal's face was blurred, and Biyao Prince invited the more magnificent Jianghu Great Emperor Dharma image, which immediately broke Zhao Ningxin's invitation. Except for the few disciples of the Zhao family in Dragon Tiger Mountain, almost no one knew who Zhao Ningxin's ancestor was. Compared with the other 3 immortals who came down from Dragon Tiger Mountain who were aggressive, the sword-carrying immortal faced the young king with a complicated look in his eyes. There was no anger on his face. He seemed to not see that the golden-armored immortal had already charged at the king of Biyao. He slowly said, "The father and son of the Su family really can't stop." At the same time, the golden-armored general who was possessed by the immortal had already arrived. When he was 50 steps away from Su Fengnian, he reached out his hand and casually grabbed in the air. A golden spear surrounded by purple lightning appeared in his hand. The spear body was engraved with obscure Taoist cloud patterns. The golden-armored immortal shouted and thrust the spear at Su Fengnian's head. Su Fengnian didn't turn around. He leaned back slightly and dodged the spear. At the same time, he raised his hand and casually grasped the golden spear. Not only were there lightning flashing between his fingers, but his entire arm was shrouded in dazzling golden light and purple clouds. After the golden-armored immortal was caught by the spear, his warhorse couldn't move forward anymore. The immortal tried to smash the mortal's head with a sweeping posture, but the spear didn't move at all. Under the shock of qi, the golden armor that symbolized the immortal's heavenly power trembled. Su Fengnian increased the strength of his 5 fingers. The golden spear made a loud bang and was directly broken by him. The golden-armored immortal's dazzling golden color suddenly dimmed. He angrily shouted, "How dare you!" Su Fengnian finally turned his head and looked at the ascended immortal wrapped in golden light. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Since both of you have descended to the mortal world, let's get off the horse together." Su Fengnian pulled the broken spear to his right. The golden-armored immortal, who didn't want to let go of the spear, was pulled off the horse. The latter obviously realized that something was wrong. When he left the horse's back, he let go of the spear and raised his hand high, as if he wanted to use something to suppress this audacious mortal. Sure enough, a square Taoist seal with dazzling thunder light hovered above the golden-armored immortal's hand. It looked like the seal of the thunderbolt deity recorded in the Taoist scriptures. He smashed it down heavily on Su Fengnian's head. At the same time, the immortal said in a deep voice, "Heavenly thunder blast." Su Fengnian didn't make any big movements with the blade in his left hand. He just made a gesture with the tip of the blade slightly raised. The 3 immortals with the Yule sword, the lotus crown on their heads, and the white deer at the gate of the Imperial Observatory seemed to want to say something at the same time. Among them, the lotus crown immortal sighed slightly. The immortal riding the white deer almost couldn't help but attack. Su Fengnian's move was Gu Jiantang's famous move, the Thunder Heart. In the last decade, Gu Jiantang, who rarely acted, only used this move to return a bow to the official when Chao Chongqing entered the Great Peace Imperial Palace with Jiang and I. Later, Jiang Fuding, who had a special status, provoked Su Fengnian and used it once against Su Fengnian. At this moment, Su Fengnian used the Thunder Heart with a force far more shocking than Jiang Fuding's. Even Jiang Fuding, who had always been proud of his talent, would feel ashamed of his inferiority if he saw this. The immortal in golden armor was just about to smash down with the Thunder Heart seal when his entire body seemed to be struck by lightning. He flew into the sky. The seal that had just formed and hadn't shown the majesty of the heavenly Tao also disappeared. Su Fengnian's sleeves moved slightly. He rose from the ground and twisted his body. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, showing the endless elegance of the number 1 person in the world. Su Fengnian appeared above the immortal in golden armor. He also reached out with his palm. His 5 fingers were also spread. However, he didn't use the Dharma seal. Instead, he simply slapped down at the immortal. There was an ancient poem that said, "The immortal touched my head and tied my hair to teach me longevity." These words contained the true essence of Taoism, causing countless cultivators in the mortal world to yearn for it. Many people visited famous mountains and great rivers just to see the true appearance of the immortals and learn the art of immortality. But today, the young vassal king in white robes, after being angrily reprimanded by the immortal, did something truly disgraceful. I touched the immortal's head. I broke longevity with one hand. Chapter 1628. The golden-armored immortal didn't even have time to defend himself before he was smashed to the ground by this extremely majestic palm strike. In the blink of an eye, the golden light around the immortal's body dissipated at an extremely fast speed. When the immortal's possessed body smashed a large hole in the ground, the golden armor he wore before was gone except for the remaining golden light in his eyes. The immortal's body was mostly restored to a mortal's body. He was bleeding from his 7 orifices and dying. Su Fengnian stood expressionlessly at the edge of the large hole, looking down at the general of the heavy cavalry who could not escape death no matter what. Unless one had reached the Vajra or heavenly image realm, one would not be able to bear the burden and die when carrying the body of a banished immortal. The people of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism were different from the ordinary martial artists of Jianghu. Just like the eminent monks of Buddhism who reached the first pin realm of the Vajra realm, the Taoist grandmasters often reached the finger mystery realm as soon as they reached the first pin realm. This was also a unique opportunity that ordinary people could not envy. However, when facing an enemy of the same realm, it was natural to advance step by step. Pure martial artists were better at fighting. For example, the early grandmasters of martial arts like Han Xingxian and Xianyuan Pan could kill 2 or 3 of them without any suspense, let alone an eminent monk of Vajra realm or a Jinren of finger mystery realm. Therefore, on the path of cultivation, there were fast and slow, and there were gains and losses. It all depended on how one chose. But generally speaking, everyone had their own opportunities. Jiang Ni's swordsmanship improved by leaps and bounds. Xianyuan Qingfeng had a series of fortuitous encounters and achieved great success in martial arts. Zhao Ningxin's failure to invite the deity was a blessing in disguise. Jiang Fuding, whose state of mind was damaged, opened a new path after hitting the tide. Chen Jibao even reaped the benefits of the fishermen several times. Xia Guinying and Xianyuan Jingxing could achieve great realms just by reading books. The burly cavalry general was completely dead. Then, a bright white rainbow rose from the large hole and swiftly swept toward the sky. I came from the sky, I will go to the sky. What can mortals do to me? It was a pity that he met Su Fengnian who had killed celestial beings and sky dragons. In the past, the Taoist great immortal Zhao Xuanzu, who had returned to simplicity, appeared in the world with a young face. He almost escaped Li Chungang and successfully killed Su Fengnian. However, even though he was killed by the flying sword of the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai, he still viciously attacked Su Fengnian before his death. The Taoist great immortal Zhao Xuanzu. He met the Dong Tai who had traveled thousands of miles to borrow a sword and set sail to visit immortals. Even Zhao Xuanzu, who was only a hair's breadth away from becoming an immortal, couldn't escape. Now, this immortal of Mount Longhu who had ascended to immortality at some unknown time and who himself was restricted by the rules of celestial being descending to the mortal world had encountered Su Fengnian, who was at the peak of his spirit, as if he was in Martial Emperor City, facing all the heroes of the world. Before Su Fengnian had made his move, many of the immortals gathered at the gate of the Imperial Observatory were simultaneously furious. The flying sword immortal standing next to Zhao Shi was even more furious. When his thunderous voice rang out, "How dare this brat!" the immortal had already disappeared without a trace. In the next moment, many of the immortals near the left and right raised their heads to see this scene. They were somewhat shocked. Then, they looked at each other in dismay and began to whisper to each other. It turned out that after the flying sword immortal blocked Su Fengnian's attack, the streak of white light was still cut in half by a bolt of thunder square that appeared out of nowhere. From then on, it dissipated between heaven and earth. Not far away, the 2 cavalry troops that had already begun their charge had no choice but to stop their warhorses. Then, they unwillingly turned around and retreated from the battlefield. Even though they were the greatest killing machines on the battlefield, they didn't dare to act rashly when 2 groups of immortals were fighting in front of them. In front of Su Fengnian, thousands of purple-gold flying swords poured down like a torrential downpour. Following closely behind was the immortal who was riding on a huge flying sword. He put 2 fingers together in front of his chest and uttered a mantra. Su Fengnian took a step forward and a step back. His knees were slightly bent. He held the blade in his left hand and pointed the tip of the blade slightly upward. He pointed the blade at the immortal who was riding on the sword. His right hand also put 2 fingers on the side of the blade and said softly, "Break the formation." Without the majestic flying sword sprinkling down like rain, without the majestic Taoist mantra, Su Fengnian simply raised his blade and said 2 simple words. A green upstanding chi, like a swimming dragon, directly broke through the dense sword formation that was falling from the sky and crashed into the immortal who was riding on the high ground. The immortal's expression changed dramatically as he made a gesture with his fingers. A crystal-clear tablet floated in front of his chest. The tablet was the most popular item in the imperial court of Dafeng dynasty. Now that the Liang dynasty had unified the spring and autumn period, it was gradually abandoned. According to the laws of Dafeng dynasty, the emperor used jade tablets, the vassals used ivory tablets, and the scholar officials used bamboo tablets. Because Dafeng dynasty worshipped Elder Huang, they specially granted the Daoist who was conferred the title of immortal to use jade tablets. However, in the Dafeng dynasty, there were only a handful of Daoist priests who were conferred the title of immortal. According to historical records, there were a total of 8 immortals in Dafeng. Unlike the Liang dynasty, the previous emperors of Dafeng dynasty worshipped Wudang and demoted dragon and tiger, so the 7 immortals came from Wudang mountain. Only one Daoist priest of Dragon and Tiger Mountain, Zhao Jingzhen, was conferred the title of immortal Dong Su. In the last years of Dafeng dynasty, this famous immortal of Dragon and Tiger Mountain had various legends of riding a sword in the sky. Presumably, the immortal's sword who returned to the mortal world this time was the immortal Dong Su, Zhao Jingzhen, who was rumored to have ascended with one foot on a sword and the other on a tablet during the last years of Dafeng dynasty. After the jade tablet appeared, it came and went in a hurry. The green upstanding chi and the pure white jade tablet collided with a loud bang, causing a strange phenomenon that seemed to shake heaven and earth. Not to mention the Li family's armored soldiers and the cavalry on the street couldn't help but cover their ears in pain. Even the sleeves of many immortals began to flutter backward. Under the head-on collision, the jade shattered. The green upstanding chi, wrapped in wind and thunder, shattered the jade tablet and pierced through the immortal's body into the sky. The sound of wind and thunder lingered in the air. It echoed in the sky for a long time. Immortal Zhao Jingzhen's outcome was the same as the golden armored immortal from before. Immortal Zenrens were not immortal. Without the support of their masters, the rain of swords instantly disappeared. For a moment, heaven and earth were clear. The 2 immortals had no power to fight back. Su Fengnian turned to dust with a snap of his fingers. The immortals looked at each other. There was no fear on their faces, only anger. No less than 30 immortals floated out together. Su Fengnian laughed softly and said, "So what if you have more people?" Facing a group of immortals, I am very familiar with the situation. I have not traveled the Jianghu 3 times for nothing. Su Fengnian did something that the immortals found inconceivable. He sheathed his saber. He opened his arms and suddenly raised them up. Rise. The 2nd year of auspicious talisman. There was a rain of swords in Great Peace City. The 2nd year of auspicious talisman had yet to enter winter. There was another rain of swords in Great Peace City. That time, they fell from the sky. There was a suspicion that the thunder was big but the rain was small. Hundreds of thousands of flying swords fell in the rain but did not hurt anyone. Earlier, when they landed and seemed to dissipate, they had quietly gathered near the imperial astronomer. This time, from the ground to the sky. If they wanted to kill, they would kill immortals. More than 30 immortals that rushed forward. In an instant, it was as if they had stepped into a pool of lightning, all disappeared in the rain. And the young king still had the leisure to talk to himself. Technical work, can't reward. Chapter 1629. The Qi cultivator Jin Xian and the great Jinren Wulingsu did not leave the small building. Although Wulingsu used unorthodox methods to obtain the identity of a living immortal, Wulingsu had always been clear about his own abilities. He did not forget himself just because his life in Tai and city was smooth sailing. This was not because Wu Lingsu's willpower was good, but because there was that tigress at home watching over him. Every time before he could be satisfied, he would be doused with cold water. It was hard not to wake up. It must be known that the red talismans on the doors of the palace to welcome the new and greet the old all came from that woman's hand. He, Wu Lingsu, was just pretending to take out his sleeve and stick it on. At this time, when Wu Lingsu thought of the request she had made not long ago, his body couldn't help but tremble and sweat poured down his back. Did he really have to be a servant of two surnames? Accurately speaking, he wasn't a servant of two surnames, he actually had the same surname. But the struggle of the same surname in the family of the emperor, the quarrel between brothers, the degree of bloodshed was even more terrifying than the internal strife in the imperial court. If she could guarantee the continuation of the Wu family's prosperity and ensure that the only son, Wu Shizhen, could inherit the title of Minister of Yue, then it was fine. But if he did as she said, the wealth in his hands was not small, but the risk was also greater. Wu Lingsu was trembling with fear. If it was before today, he still felt that the Zhao family of Liang could stick a protective talisman on his head. The heavens were high and the emperor was far away, not to mention a vassal king far away in the northwest. But when that young man killed his way to Tai and city and even directly to the imperial astronomer, great Zhenren Wu had to think carefully. Jin Xian and did not look into Zhenren Wu's loss of composure. He only treated it as a fake immortal meeting a real immortal and was worried that the Wu family's position in the Liang imperial court would not be maintained. Besides, Jin Xian was too busy to pay attention to a puppet of two generations of emperors. Jin Xian raised his head and looked at the portraits on the wall. The portraits were still intact, but many of the people in the portraits had disappeared. This was a huge blow to the Qi cultivator grandmaster who wanted to become an immortal on land and then ascend before the gate of heaven closed. Since ancient times, the people who cultivated Tao believed that those who ascend would have eternal life. But if even immortals could die, then if he helped Xie Guanyin do evil, even if he ascended, could he really escape the cycle of heaven? It was easier to become an official if one had connections in the imperial court. Wasn't it the same if one wanted to become an immortal? Why did the celestial master mansion of Longhu Mountain have people ascending from generation to generation after Dafeng, while the Wudang Mountain, which was also the ancestral court, was dying? If Ancestor Lu had not entered the gate of heaven, would things have been completely different with Ancestor Lu Dongshuan's ancestral shadow? With Huang Manshan and Wang Chongluo's profound cultivation, wouldn't ascension be within reach? How could there be no immortals in the blessed land for 400 years? Compared to Wu Lingsu's fear and Jin Xian's absent-mindedness, the two elderly Taoist priests who were responsible for offering incense all year round looked haggard. One of them leaned against a pillar, his eyes unfocused. One of them knelt on the futon devoutly, silently chanting mantras. Xie Guanyin sat lazily on the edge of the heavenly platform, his feet hanging in the air, as if he wasn't worried at all about being caught in the crossfire. In fact, whether it was hiding or escaping, if Xie Guanyin claimed to be the second in the world, no one would dare to claim to be the first in the world. Within the borders of Western Shu, he had evaded Deng Tei's thousandly flying sword, which was brimming with killing intent. However, earlier in the year of Hongjia, he had evaded two soul-stirring pursuits. Back then, Xie Guanyin and Li Yishan were both young and vigorous God's favored sons. They hit it off immediately, especially Xie Guanyin, who was proficient in divination. He even revealed the secrets of heaven, which led to a monstrous disaster. Li Yishan was a bachelor. He only had talent but no background. Logically speaking, he should have died long ago. However, he unintentionally got close to a tree like Su Shao and managed to escape that storm. On the other hand, Xie Feiyu, who was born in a wealthy family, was deserted by everyone and treated as an abandoned child. He was even considered a must-kill by East Sea Martial Emperor City. Even the old lady who ascended the throne later bore a grudge against him. She didn't hesitate to let Tuoba Bodhisattva sneak into Liang to assassinate him. Because of this, he had to change his name and hide in the imperial court. Even his own flesh and blood didn't know if he was alive or dead. Therefore, there was no more Xie Feiyu in the world who hoped to leap over the dragon gate. There was only Mr. Xia of Great Peace City who should be hiding behind the scenes. In the eyes of Xia Guining, who had watched the world's affairs with cold eyes for more than 20 years, Li Shan and Nailan Yusi were the same type of people. Sun Ping, Zhang Julu, and Yuan Benshi were the same type of people. Huang Longsher, who had a loose tongue, was another type of person. However, in the end, Xia Guining felt that they were the same type of people. They worked for others, a land, a country, and the world. The only thing they weren't good at was working for themselves. If they couldn't even take care of themselves, how could they help the world? Among them, Yuan Benshi wanted to work for himself, but he couldn't. Huang Sanjia could do it, but he disdained to do it. Xia Guining's plan was to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. He wanted the Central Plains to sink again. Then, he would personally obtain 1,000 years of peace. If one said that Xia Guining was seeking the status of Grand Secretary or Imperial Preceptor, or a few decades of peace and prosperity, or even ascending to become an immortal, then they were underestimating him too much. Since Huang Longsher said that there was no 100-year emperor or 1,000-year dynasty in the world, then he, Xia Guining, would have to wrestle with this outsider, who claimed to know about the future of 1,000 years. Xia Guining suddenly felt a little lonely. The old faces and acquaintances had almost all left these years. Except for Nailan Yusi, it seemed that everyone else had died. Although there were many newcomers, in fact, except for Chen Wang, who was successful in his official career, the others still needed various polishing and scrutiny even if their futures were promising. In comparison, Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang of Beiliang stood out faster. Jean Lanting, who was not inferior to Chen Wang and was already the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. Xia Guining had never put this kind of clown in his eyes. Adding oil to the fire was never a long-term solution. It was just a flash in the pan. Between the replacement of the old and the new, Xia Guining was not optimistic about Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochun. On the other hand, Liu Baijia, Yuan Gua, and Han Lin, the three civil officials who were either demoted or promoted to the local government, had the hope to take over the responsibilities from Qi Yanglong and Huan Wen. They were the top officials for a short time, but they were still paving the way and building bridges for Chen Wang, Yan Qi, Li Jifu, and the others. During the reign of Yonghui, there were only two real mainstays of the Liang dynasty. There was the blue-eyed Zhang Julu and the warrior Su Shao. It was the existence of these two people that deterred all the dragons, snakes, fish, and shrimps in the imperial court. With Zhang Julu, the literati who wanted to make achievements honestly ruled the country, and the literati who advocated quiet talk continued to talk about the wind and the moon. With Su Shao, Chen Zhibao could not leave Western Shu, Chao Changqing could not restore the country, Yan King Zhaobing did not dare to march north with great fanfare, Gu Jiantang could only be the governor of Liao province, and Beimang's army did not dare to march south. However, it was precisely because of the two of them, one was at the center of the imperial court, deciding the promotion of all the officials, and the other was at the northwest border, commanding 300,000 cavalrymen, that the late Emperor Zhao Dun did not dare to give the dragon throne to his son Zhao Zhuan, because there were too many thorns on the throne. The biggest knot was that as long as Su Shao was alive, Beimang would not dare to stake everything on a single throw to invade the Central Plains. Beiliang could substitute defense for war, allowing Liang to prosper day by day, and its national strength to gradually increase, restraining and dragging Beimang to death. However, if they took the initiative to march north into the desert, firstly, Beiliang's chances of victory were not high, and secondly, Zhao Dun would not dare to do so. Su Shao would not rebel, but once the northern expedition went smoothly, and Crown Prince Su Fengnian established his prestige in the northern expedition, would Su Shao have the idea to give his son a higher position than the vassal king's throne? Even if Su Shao would not do so, would Su Fengnian take advantage of the situation to rebel because of the white clothes case in the capital? Even if the Su family only conquered half of Beimang, with the vast territory of the southern dynasties as strategic depth and abundant supplies, how could Liang resist the battle-hardened Beiliang cavalry? When the time came, when the wind and rain were tossed about, would the new emperor, Zhao Zhuan, who did not have much prestige to speak of, really be able to rely on the eloquence of the civil officials of Tai and city to stop Beiliang's cavalry? taking advantage of West Chu's rebellion to weaken the vassals and suppress the power of the local generals, and at the same time taking the opportunity to demonstrate martial arts to the world on the battlefield of Guangling, was the strategy that the late emperor, Zhang Julu, Huan Wen, and Yuan Benshi had no choice but to do. In reality, they were buying time, taking advantage of the fact that Su Fengnian was not fully fledged. Even if West Chu did not rebel, Liang would still force Chao Chongqing to rise in rebellion. The imperial court had Gu Jiantang personally oversee the two Liao provinces, and Qin Jibao the vassal state of Western Shu, making an aggressive stance towards Beiliang everywhere. How could a Beiliang that did not have any reinforcements not give Bei Mang, who had been accumulating strength for 20 years, an opportunity to exploit? A chance to take down a Beiliang that finally did not have Su Shao leading the border army? Bei Mang attacking Beiliang had the same meaning as Su Shao winning the Battle of the Western Wall. Although the price was huge, the results were obvious. One battle decided the fate of the country. Looking at it now, the direction of the two dynasties did not change, but there were many deviations. Even after Wu Zhongshuan left Nanjiang and joined Liang, the Guangling War did not quickly change. On the other hand, Northern Liang had obtained a tragic victory. It was tragic and heroic. What was even more unexpected was that the Beiliang frontier army lost 100,000 men less than Liang had predicted. Especially the 130,000 to 140,000 cavalry, they did not suffer any major injuries. Today, they still maintained an impressive number of around 100,000 men. Originally, not only did Beiliang win a Pyrrhic victory, the Second Great Battle of Liangmang would directly spread the flames of war to Beiliang's Dao territory, or even Lingzhou. Looking at it now, Beiliang fighting to the death outside the pass was not a fool's dream. Therefore, when Su Fengnian left the vassal land without permission and Liang retreated step by step, it was not that great peace city suddenly liked to talk about comradeship and reason with people. Instead, it was because they were afraid that Beiliang would do something irreparable in a fit of anger. It was a pity that other than Tantanon, whose heart was like dead ashes, those few people of the older generation who had set the trap had all died one after another. Now, the crucial point was how Grand Chancellor Qi, whom Zhao Dun had high hopes for, would react. Chapter 1630. Before his death, Zhao Zhuan had made many plans, both overtly and covertly. He had planted many foreshadowing in the officialdom, which gave Zhao Zhuan a great opportunity to display his skills after he ascended the throne. So far, it seemed that the young emperor had done a good job. Even Huan Wen, who held a grudge in his heart, was still cautious and conscientious in the new Xiangfu dynasty. There was not much of a gap between him and Qi Yanglong, and he became a mender. Unlike Su Fengnian, who could win the hearts of Beiliang's soldiers by risking his life on the battlefield, the young emperor Zhao Zhuan was like the most honorable caged bird in the world, relying only on the skin of the dragon robe. Therefore, his majesty as an emperor required years and years of hard work to build. Of course, if Zhao Zhuan could have Su Fengnian's martial cultivation, it would be a different story. For example, when Chao Chongqing and the princess of West Chu came to deliver gifts, he defeated Chao Guanzi before Gu Jiantang and Master Lu Hao. However, in the path of martial arts, there was no such thing as a great grandmaster without risking one's life. Even Xianyuan Qingfeng, whose strength had improved by leaps and bounds, did a crazy thing like fighting to the death with Wang Xianji. Yuan Benshi's illegitimate son, Jiang Fuding, who had outstanding talent, even if he had received guidance from a large group of experts such as Gu Jiantang and Master Lu Hao, Qi Jiajia, in the end, he still ended up as a tide-bearer in Donghai. Xia Guining said softly, "Several pillars of the country can work together to support a throne room that is swaying in the wind and rain. However, a cornerstone can allow a dynasty to remain standing in the face of a once-in-a-century storm. Zhao Zhuan, Chen Wang by your side is still too young. It will take time to become someone like Zhang Julu. You can wait, but others won't." Xia Guining closed his eyes, calm and composed. He didn't care about the immortals who walked out of the hanging statues and died like moths to a flame. Anyway, the ones who lost were the Su and Zhao families. Xia Guining, who had personally created this situation, couldn't be more happy. If the Qi refinement warriors from the north and the south were all dead, it would be more beneficial to Xia Guining's long-term plan. Therefore, it would be best if Jean Xian and could bow his head and listen to his orders. If he refused, Xia Guining would not only have the ability to escape. However, Tantai Pingjing accidentally dragged her family to Beiliang, so it was not easy to make a move. Now she seemed to have gone to Guangling Road alone, which was a hidden danger. As for Mount Lantua of the western regions, it no longer shunned the world with cold eyes. After Lu Songtao's death, it also put down its arrogance and chose to enter the world and rely on Beiliang. The white-robed monk Li Dangxin also went to Beiliang. Even Huyen Dagwan's family of 3, why did they all bring their families with them? Recently, there was also Duke Yenxing who left the capital without warning. It should be known that this saint had helped Zhao Shi of Liyang to persuade Chao Changqi not long ago. Xia Guining, who was smiling at first, suddenly frowned. He opened his eyes and sat up, looking at the northwest. Xia Guining was a little annoyed. Was the reason why his vision began to blur because he had also become a part of the game? Then Xia Guining suddenly withdrew his gaze and looked down. As a result, he saw the seemingly innocent young Jianzheng, the child nicknamed Little Bookcase, grinning at him. At the same high place, the young emperor, Chen Wang, and Lu Su on the roof of the main hall did not speak much. Only the eunuch of the ceremony directorate stood under the eaves from time to time and reported the situation at the imperial astronomer in detail with a voice that was neither soft nor loud, just enough to be heard clearly. When Zhao Zhuan heard that 2 carriages and 4 women appeared over there, the young emperor was a little self-deprecating and helpless. After that, his brother-in-law Yan Qiji went to the palace to have an audience. It was also an indispensable and important step for Yan Qiji to rush to the palace to pass a message to Su Fengnian. But when Yan Qiji hurried back and knelt under the eaves, the young emperor was obviously a little angry. Even the seal eunuch Song Tonglu was a little nervous. Song Tonglu knew that other than Yan Qiji's identity as a relative of the imperial family, he was also a very special balance. As for the balance in the previous emperor's heart, one of them was the scholar Yan Jieshi. This dual leader of Beiliang's literary and officialdom had betrayed Beiliang and entered the court. Naturally, the previous emperor was very happy and favored the entire Yan family. Yan Jieshi was made one of the 6 palace scholars, and his daughter Yan Dongwu was now the empress. In reality, Jean Lanting was also the same, so his meteoric rise shocked the entire capital. Yao Baifeng was also the same, but this great scholar of Confucianism had leaned toward Beiliang and Su Shao many times in court. Thus, he was still an imperial college chancellor with high hopes but no real power. As an old acquaintance of Zhang Lu, Yuan Guo was even more pitiful. He had finally come back and become the Minister of Rights. Because he stood on the wrong side of the issues of the transport of grain and the printing of documents, he was quickly sent packing out of Great Peace City. As a scholar, it was important to have strength of character. As a civil official, it was not as important to have strength of character as the scholars imagined. The difference of one word was like the difference between heaven and earth. The emperor and the young master of the Yellow Gate, both of whom had good reputations, were in a deadlock, one high, one low, one sitting, one kneeling. Chen Wang smiled and stood. The young emperor seemed to say in a fit of pique to ignore him, but Chen Wang still walked down the ladder to the ground. He helped Yan Qiji up but did not help him up. Chen Wang did not force him. He stood at the feet of this rising star of the Hanlin Academy. Looking at the tightly closed palace doors, he said softly, "Stand up. The more you kneel, the more useless it is. You cannot sink too deeply into the matter of figuring out the emperor's heart, but you cannot do nothing. You are not an official that seeks fame to seek favor. Of course, Yan Qiji does not need it. In reality, you can't do it. Since this is the case, rather than have the emperor vent his anger on the king of Beiliang, you might as well stand up and shamelessly follow me to the roof. Just think of it as looking at the scenery. At the very least, you will make the bad thing worse, right?" Yan Qiji lowered his head and knelt without saying a word. Chen Wang, who had always been gentle and respectful, suddenly lowered his voice and said sternly, "What, are you not afraid of implicating your father and sister? Or is it that your Yan family has more descendants than the dazzling Jiangnan Lu family?" Without you, Yan Qiji, you can easily bring out a few more. If you really have the ability, then bring the Empress and Scholar Yan here to kneel. When the time comes, I, Chen Wang, will kneel with you. Everyone can join in the fun. How about that? Yan Qiji's shoulders trembled. He no longer cried silently, but sobbed silently. Chen Wang sighed and said softly, I, Chen Wang, am not like you. I am just a poor scholar studying hard. I have some classmates in my hometown, some in the same year as the imperial examination, and some colleagues in the officialdom. But there are very few who can truly be called friends. It can even be said that there is not one. So, I do not agree with you kneeling to beg the emperor for mercy, but I can somewhat understand. You and I are now rich, powerful, and famous. It's actually very simple. Chen Wang glanced out of the corner of his eye at the eunuch in embroidered robes standing silently with his hands behind his back. The latter did not move. Chen Wang hesitated and then squatted down next to Yan Qiji. He said lightly, the old King Liang has the strongest army in the world, hundreds of thousands of cavalry. From the northwest border to Great Peace City, it is not as far as we think. But every time the general enters the capital, he only has a few personal retainers with him. Of these two matters, which do you think is more difficult? For normal people, it is the former, but for the general, it is the latter. When a general has a large army, and a civil official has the power of the court, what is difficult is not to be spirited like normal people think, but to not act recklessly. Instead, to weigh each of the 5 words, loyalty, filial piety, benevolence, righteousness, and affection. Chen Wang smiled. The new King Liang, Su Fengnian, your good brother, has also weighed these 5 words these years. As an official, speak of loyalty. As a son, speak of filial piety. As a general, speak of benevolence. As a brother, speak of righteousness. As a husband, speak of affection. In my view, his entry into the capital this time was unexpected but reasonable. He put aside the word of loyalty and picked up the word of filial piety. In reality, I am slightly disappointed that he would abandon the country for his own selfish interests. But I also know that this is my inhumane request. It is my wishful thinking to place Su Fengnian in the position of a saint. In reality, it is the exact opposite. I knew long ago that Su Fengnian was never a saint. In the end, he is a man of the Jianghu, and is more suited to the Jianghu. In the high court, he is a young vassal king with grievances that are difficult to resolve. But in the distant Jianghu, he can become a hero that does not lose to Li Chungang. He chose to leave the Jianghu, and take on a heavy responsibility to stand outside the Beiliang border. He did not have any freedom, and only people died. I think that Su Fengnian is already very unhappy. In short, he is unhappy. It is a very simple principle, but many people do not understand it. If someone says Su Fengnian, he should be satisfied. But I, Chen Wang, am a poor scholar at the bottom of the marketplace. Step by step, I have reached my current position. But there are some things that I am also very unhappy about. You can't say that it is easy for me to stand and talk, right? You can't. If anyone says that and I hear it, I will one day make them even more unhappy. See, I am also not a saint. This has nothing to do with whether or not I am an official of the left scattered cavalry or not. None of us are saints. So, His Majesty is also not a saint. There is justice in heaven and earth, and people also have human nature. It is not wrong to follow this principle and conduct oneself in the world. So, because Su Fengnian is Su Zhao's son, it is not wrong for him to come to the capital and go to the imperial astronomer. Because His Majesty is the son of the previous emperor, it is difficult for him to back down. It is also not wrong for him to be unwilling to back down. Since that is the case, you, Yan Qiji, have already knelt. His Majesty and I both understand your principles. Why do you want to take a mile after taking an inch? Even the ignorant children in the capital know that kneeling in the imperial court is a simple matter. Being able to stand is difficult. Why don't I take a look and see if there is gold or silver on the ground?